Just for your information, this meeting will be recorded and the things will go up on the website after the meeting. Smile that way. You guys are nice and safe there. Morena koutou. No mai haere mai ki te kumiera o Pōtiki. Should there be a tsunami warning, we'll move to my place, just in case. Probably not a good start. But welcome everybody, and welcome the mayors on our Zoom. We have Mayor Steve, Mayor Gary, and
Still waiting to see if Mayoral join on Untitled Chapter.
all right, so I acknowledge you there. Thank you, mayors. We have received an apology from Miriam Taras from Western Bay of Plenty. And I know that Mayor Gary must leave at 11:15, and Mayor Steve will need to zoom in and out on occasions with a couple of other things, if I remember from our last conversation. So any other apologies?
Yes, Chair, Mayor David Travis.
Thank you. I'm looking forward when we can come to your neck of the woods for one of our meetings down Taupo Way.
We always look forward to hosting you. It'll be great.
Cool.
Fishing in the afternoon.
Very good. Could I have a mover for the acceptance of apologies? Thank you, Mayor Malcolm. Seconder, thank you, Mayor Judy. We'll pass those, thanks. There's no late items for this meeting. We'll just very quickly look at the Mayoral Forum minutes from our last meeting of October 2020.
I move.
Sorry, what was that? Thank you, Mayor Steve.
Yep.
Yes, good. And seconder? Mayor Judy. Any matters arising, any matters of correctness? All right, I'll put those. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you very much. Good notes. We'll have to catch up on the signature for those. All right. So we now have a presentation from Enviro Hub, and we are joined by Joy Moore and Mary Dillon. Please come forward. We have a presentation now showing on your screen. I'll just dim the lights a little bit here. Only a couple, fine, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for giving us the opportunity of speaking to you today. And I must apologise for the absence of Kara Apuhata. This patient has been gathered protein for the Tainga Whenua. Unfortunately, she has a very heavy cold and it didn't seem like a wise option to bring her to see all of you today. So we're just really know another round of COVID, so you don't want any of these things to happen. As you know, Enviro has been around for a long time and is probably best known to most of you for its annual delivery of sustainable backyards in March of every year. Sustainable Backyards is a very successful project that has also taught us a lot. We all know that over 85% of us now live in towns and cities, and in the process of that urbanisation, many of us have perhaps unwittingly lost our connection to nature and to the natural environment. We've become desensitised to the gradual depletion of water quality, of biodiversity, of green space, and the real social and environmental benefits of sustaining neighbourhoods. In our towns and cities, there is a rising concern that somehow we have lost something that used to be precious and well-being. In the last year, with some funding from Western Bay and from Tauranga City, we have tested that disconnection and what changes occur when you support a street or a neighbourhood to re-engage with nature, to become aware of the area, and what happens when you change your behaviours. It's fun to plant and grow, to accept that there is no such thing as a wave with waste, that water is a resource, and that each one of us can help to restore biodiversity in our urban areas. And that when you work together and you get to know your community, you become just that, a community, safer, greener, healthier. Wairiki National Park Region, or Wairiki Park Region, is our version of a movement that was begun as London National Park City and is growing worldwide. It seeks to make community behaviour change sustainable, resilient, regenerative, co-creative and permanent. The movement uses all the natural attributes of each place to rethink how we use these spaces for community, for saving the environment, for re-greening our towns and facilities, and for mitigating climate change issues such as CO2 emissions and biodiversity loss. Most importantly, the reconnections in the world of nature enables each of us to change the way we look at the place in which we live, and to see ourselves as part of the capital of nature rather than separate users and frequently abusers of our natural capital. Wairiki Park Region is still being grown. Joy will introduce you to the project today, and where we're at, it's a movement rather than a project. And our current intention is to launch with Mother Region. Thank you, that's my presentation. Briefly to you, I'll now hand over to Joy.
Thank you, Mary.
Park Region.
Thank you, Mary. I just need to advise you that I'm going for the rock star look this morning. I left my glasses on the table, so if you see me go up and down, it's just because I can't see you very well, but I want to, but I can see here, so we should have some fun with that. So my name is Joy Moya. I'm project lead for Wairiki Park Region, and as we said, Carla Akuhata was going to be here today. She is my co-partner. Where you see me, you see her. Where you see her, you see me. So today, taking her communications, Maori, and journalism background, my sustainable business, care for nature, and corporate background, we're quite a little duo, and this is our kind of project from a passion perspective, but also from a professional perspective. So we are the Wairiki Park Region, a new environmental initiative powered by Envirohub Bay of Plenty. Let's see how it works.
So you're good. There you go.
Right. Oh, we're heading some.
I can run it here for you, that's easy.
It's okay. Once I've got me flowing, I'm good. So our mission is to make Wairiki greener, healthier, wilder, and more resilient. It's stretching from Katikati and Waihi in the west through to Whakatane, to Opotiki and the coast in the east, stretching down through Taronga, Rotorua, down to Taupo and Tarangi in the south. And that is the roki that represents Wairiki Park Region. Just a note on the logo, you will notice the 3 mountains of our region, and you will also notice the lakes, the rivers, the sea, and notice how they're all in balance. We, however, are not pitching a shovel-ready environmental initiative. We are creating, and as Mary has mentioned, a movement to inspire the people of Wairiki to embrace biophilia. So there is some real science that sits behind this, our intrinsic need to be connected with and involved and kind of embraced by nature. So there is a need and a desire to kind of connect with that. And what you're seeing in front of you is something called the what ifs. And there are limitless amount of what ifs. What ifs? What could we do with our region? How might that look like? What might that be for yourselves? But imagine yourself right now, let's take a moment, and to be in one of the national parks around New Zealand. Think about it from a sensory perspective. What do you see when you're in a national park? What do you feel? What do you smell? How does it make you feel? Now imagine yourself back at home, back at work, in a shopping centre. How does that make you feel? What's the sensory experience? Notice the difference. We want to bring the natural beauty of our national parks into our everyday lives so that our whole city and Roe Heath thrives and that we create a better future for our future children. Because we all know that when we spend time in nature, we increase our health and well-being. But really, what might that look like? So imagine our urban areas and our towns and cities with a lot more flora and fauna. What would that do for biodiversity? This is an actual tower block that's in Italy, and as you can see, it's fairly well established. So air quality, biodiversity, smell, aesthetics, quite an interesting thing to be thinking about. As Mary's mentioned, this initiative is inspired by London National Park City and was set up by World Urban Park, Salzburg Seminar Global and London National Park City Foundation. Their intention is to increase their green cover from 47% to 50%. And they want to bring the beauty of nature into the residents' lives by making London greener and healthier. Wailiki Park region is part of a growing global community, and here are some of the cities that are also having this conversation. We meet monthly and we talk about what we're doing, how does that align, how can we support each other. So it's great to know that we're evolving as part of a global conversation. And the aim is to have 25 national park cities by 2025. However, we understand here in Accelerators, we must respect and recognise the importance of Te Ao Maori that has to offer our initiative and also our people. Yeah. Oh, gone the wrong way. I do apologise. Right. To achieve its overall mission, Wailiki Park region must be seen as an enactment of the intention of Titioti o Waitangi in that it proposes to bring the belief systems of the two parties together to ensure that we are providing a better future for our future generations. The initiative will work to ensure all articles, particularly Article 2, is upheld, and that we will ensure this by accelerating good environmental action throughout the application of biophilia. So, therefore, Wailiki Park region is being co-designed and has been co-designed from the word go, including with iwi, to inspire environmental action by reconnecting people back to each other and to nature through stories, knowledge, connections, and information. We want to use Maturangi Maori and Western science to help promote environmental action. To do this, we are seeking a total change in the system as we know it. But we also know that none of us can do this on our own. We're all doing good stuff around the region and we're all sitting in different spaces within the system. So what we want to do is build the movement to connect everyone and to give ourselves a space in which it's a safe space for all to be engaged with. But what is a movement without a set of values to guide us? Firstly, we recognise the famous saying from the Maori king, "To the eye of an eagle must pass the red, the white and the black thread." This urges us to collaborate. We also want to work face to face with each other, hence the opportunity to be here today is awesome. We want to make sure our intent is good and we want to guide good practice and we always want to act in a manner-enhancing way. And we recognise that we can all be chiefs in this and all play our parts. And it urges us to join together, collaborate and unite as a movement together. But how are we going to do this? We plan to achieve our overall mission through our 5 key goals that you can see here. How we will do this? We wish to act as a regional movement for everyone, but with a first focus on individual change, particularly in the urban areas. We want to walk alongside and work with Tangata Whenua to make sure we are supported and informed by their commitment to Kaitiakitanga. We want to make it really easy for the community to find education and opportunities to connect with nature. Saving time and effort is the biggest piece of feedback that we get from everybody in this space, and I'm sure we can all relate to that individually. Use as an integral resource all the organisations and all the initiatives that already exist, and building partnerships and networking. We don't need to create anything new because it all exists, but stitching it together may or will create accelerated action. Our aim is therefore to increase environmental knowledge and action, increase the environmental conversation, be a springboard for success stories and inspiration, and meet the needs of those that are wanting to do more now, all the while aligning to the Department of Conservation's biodiversity strategy, our shared vision for living with nature. But what's in it for you? What's in it for your next door neighbour? What's in it for your neighbourhood? When we think about the people that might just be a little bit more engaged now post-COVID, and are kind of going, well, what is this environmental sustainability stuff? What we believe is that Warwick Park region will target the key audience, the mainstream audience that is beginning to come into this space. And this is what we believe they will benefit from. And we know that Warwick Park region will increase the community connectivity, especially as we continue to find our way journeying through climate change and biodiversity and ecological emergencies that we're all committed to supporting. In addition, for councils, we see this as a vehicle for you to engage differently with your community and building more trust in the community by sharing your environmental stories, your practice, your successes, and your champions. And for iwi, we see this as an opportunity for storytelling, supporting safe spaces for new partnerships, and over the long term, lead to a growth in public understanding for Tamati Whenua. And ultimately, for all of us, closing the gap with the understanding that we are all part of nature and not separate. But I can still hear you saying, so how? So what we are proposing is to develop a toolkit for the community at large and for iwi, and for environmental groups and social groups, and for central government, and for DOC, and for yourselves at regional and district councils. It will consist of an 8-person team that will support and drive good environmental action, and a fully interactive digital platform, not website, to enable connection and collaboration. The central team will be responsible for communications, Maori engagement, and environmental data management. We see some exciting opportunities with environmental data, as little exists around the region, and there is definitely a space for activities and campaigns that drive local and regional engagement with key flora and fauna, with health outcomes intrinsically built in, as they will all be nature-based. Everything will be about helping to grow the movement, including supporting and advocating council programmes and people. The 4 environmental accelerators will be a physical resource based across the region, one in Eastern Bay, one in Western Bay, one in Rotorua, and one in Taupo. They will help get activities over the line. They will create meaningful and useful interventions, so they help support, advocate, and accelerate action. They will help get activities completed, and they will work with families, schools, iwi, organisations wanting to do more but not knowing where to go, where to start, or how to start. So some examples could be encouraging home-based, neighbourhood-based greening activities such as the sustainable backyards and the neighbourhood backyard programme that Mary mentioned. Partnership support for council and iwis, a lead generator for volunteers for environmental groups. The opportunities are limitless, and every conversation that we have sparks another idea. So what the EA, the Environmental Accelerator, will do is add value to what is already happening. Fill the gap, be an environmental problem solver, be a gaffer, do whatever they need to do. It's a very, very role that we are anticipating. All the while working with existing organisations, collecting data and stories as we go. In front of you is a very, very early draft of our digital platform, our interactive map. You will notice that it is a tiny area, and what we are aspiring to through environmental data is bring the region alive from an environmental perspective. This is, there is no accurate data here, this is a perception of what we could do, and we're working with some great future-proofing technological companies that want to work with us and think about where we need to be, how do we make this happen over the long term. We want to be able to have smart social media, and we know we want to connect with TikTok and any future platform that comes our way. So we're building a bedrock technical application that we want people's data and information and stories, so we can just build this story for the region. Phase 2 and Phase 3, we're building gamification, APIs, which is automatic uploads and downloads, and e-commerce, to ensure that this is future-proof and will grow with the younger generations as they grow. And this is just an idea of some of the information that we would like to see behind the dots. Where is it? What is it? What is the flora and fauna? What are the iwi? What other information we may have? We will be putting all of this through focus groups, and it is a development in process. But we have the funding for this Phase 1, which we're really excited about. Well, to get us to where we are now, we established the Wairiki Park Advisory Group in early 2020, and Carla and I had a lot of conversations with lots of people around the region, because we've been really keen to understand how do we get on this track and do it right, and do it in a way that supports the region to be greener and healthier. There is strong support for this initiative and an understanding that we can all contribute and be a part of the solution. We're in conversations with the iwi, and they are providing us a steer of when and how they wish to be involved, and what they may or may not want to do in order to share or engage, which is as appropriate for each of them. And we have direct funding for iwi collaboration. So this is an ongoing piece of work, and this will keep going, and really enables us to do this in co-design. Many councils have staff and councillors already engaged, and it is growing month on month. This initiative is long-term, and we are keen for it to grow sustainably with quality over quantity, and to actually at some stage be able to support itself from a financial perspective. But this is a long-term aim. So finally, why are we here today? We're not here today to add some money, though we will be applying through the long-term plans and look for developing a collaborative funding kind of model between you all. We all contribute, we all benefit, and it's all mutually amazing. You can hear the passion there, you know. But what we really need from you today is public endorsement, a letter of support. Something that says that each of your councils, as our leaders, our critical stakeholders, our critical regional influencers, having a letter of intent, share, whatever it works for you, we would be very grateful. A lot of the cities around the world only have one mayor, and they have several councils. So even though we have a kind of small number, 350,000 people compared to London, 7 million, and all the other cities, I'm really keen, and we're really keen that this is collaborative and that we're all in this. So that is our big ask from today, is that if we could share, that you would be happy to share that with us. And really, yeah, that's it for now. There's plenty more detail if you would like, but hopefully that's of interest, and you're really keen to get your feedback and questions, because the questions and the detail is really what's important to us, so we keep evolving this in the right way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joy. Mayor Steve, was your question answered during the rest of the time, or do you still have one to put forward to Joy?
No, and I think it's a pretty generic question, but I'll make a statement first that the concept is very lofty and quite laudable. I think the reality for us at TLA level is the capacity to respond, and I'm not going to speak for our partnership board that are very caught up on enacting their own Te Arawa vision, which has climate change as one of the planks in there, working with the environment and people. My my concern is who funds it. I did no problem with a letter of support, but ultimately we get drawn into funding commitments through the LTP, and we do have our own funding commitments to Te Arawa Lakes strategy. So that's another one doing this work. Te Tata or Te Arawa, Mana Whenua, I can't speak for and won't as a mayor. And so there are still some concerns about capability to respond and is it our top priority. But if we don't start this journey, then it won't happen.
Is there an answer in there?
I totally accept everything that you're saying, Stevie. I think my vision, or the vision that we've got of Warwick Park region at the moment, is very local, very individual street community stuff. And it's about changing behaviours of individuals and small groups of people permanently. I think one of the things that concerns me a great deal is into a massive effort into environmental improvements. And I always ask myself the question, and then? If we do not change the way we behave as individuals, as streets, as communities, all of the environmental work that we do eventually gets unpicked. We've only got to look at the history of New Zealand to see that that actually happened. So this movement, and it is in the UK, is fundamentally about changing the way we connect with the environment and the way we behave with resources as a result of that. So I don't see that as being a project that, at least for the time being, needs massive amounts of dollars. I think it requires a connection to all the things that are going on and to see the opportunity to add value and to actually change the lens of the way you're approaching things so that that behaviour is changing. And the example I often use is smoking. Smoking didn't change from governments, it changed from communities thinking about what was happening and insisting governments change. And I think these things are the same. It is over to communities at the end of the day. We do tremendous work with climate change and all those things at this level. But here, the 85% of us who live in towns who chew up this nation's resources every day need to change. And that's what this is focused on. And a natural resource. And then once you reconnect with the environment, then you're on a whole other journey.
Thank you, Mary. We have an ask of 2 more questions, and I'm conscious that we have about 2 minutes left before we move on to our next zoomed-in call. So what I'm proposing is to hear the questions from Mayor Gary and from Steph. Just Mayor Gary. And if we don't have time to answer it, could we have you answer and come back to us through our notes later? Thanks, Mayor Gary.
Yeah, thank you. My answer can wait, but the question is on page 10 of the Regional Council consultation document, which talks about our climate change statement, seems to me to be a complete duplication of what you have presented, young Mary.
Yes.
And I just wonder, are we coordinated here and are we getting a good investment or are we going to duplicate it and do 2-pronged attack? Don't need the answer now, but somebody from the Regional Council needs to let us know what the plans are and who's doing what. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mary and Joy, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
That was really good.
Letting us come along, and we look forward to receiving your letters of support so we may continue.
Thank you. Yes, so we're moving to our second presentation, which is the regional approach to climate change. So I'm sure Joy and Mary, you would probably enjoy staying to listen to this one through. And I'm just going to right. So we have Dr. Judy Lawrence, and we have between 30 and 40 minutes. Obviously 30 if we have morning tea at 10:30, but we'll let that stretch a little bit, I'm sure. Dr. Judy, are you there?
Yeah, good morning. Sorry, I've got
Good morning.
I've got a lot of echo from your table, so forgive me if I didn't catch all that.
That's all good.
Yeah. Do you want me
We'll try and fix that for you first. Is that
Okay.
better?
Slightly, yes. Let me do the presentation and then we can have some discussion and we'll check it again. But
Thank you very much.
yeah, Morena, and thank you very much for the request for us to come and talk to you about the Commission's work with the draft advice, which is out at consultation. I also have with me Sally Garden, one of the Commission staff, who will also be in on this call. So if there are any questions I can't cope with, she will back me up. So, but look, thank you very much, and really appreciate having this conversation with local government people who are critical to the implementation of our advice. So I hope we can have a short discussion on that at the end. But just to give you the background, the Commission's role is really twofold. It's looking at both mitigation and adaptation, but this time round our advice is principally on the budgets, the emission budgets that can meet the targets that are set out in the Climate Change Response Act. And so in the mitigation space, we're looking at the level of the emission budgets in terms of how much over 3 budget periods to 2035 we can reduce our emissions. And we've also given advice on the policy direction to meet those budgets. And also we've covered off something about the emissions trading system settings that are complementary to the policy directions. And also we have a role to monitor government's progress towards meeting those budgets. And I'll come back to that because the monitoring is really important to get linked up with what local government are doing. And of course, be aware also that the Commission has a role to review the implementation of the National Adaptation Plan, which is currently under preparation, and also to carry out the future climate risk assessments. Now, you'll be aware that the government did the first climate risk assessment that came out last year, and that is the basis from which they're developing the National Adaptation Plan. So, so that's just a broad overview of what our 2 critical roles are in dealing with climate change. So if we go to the next slide, our advice is to provide a comprehensive strategy for tackling climate change. And the 4 areas that our advice cover are the levels of the first 3 emission budget periods and the direction of the emissions reduction plan. But also we had 2 requests from the Minister to answer, which was the consistency of New Zealand's first national defined contribution as to whether it stays within 1.5 degrees of global warming. Now, for those of you not familiar with the NDC, it is New Zealand's international statement under the UN framework for climate change on what our contribution is globally. It is guided by a number of rules, which is that developing countries have to do more effort than the developed countries have to do more effort than the developing countries. And there are issues of global equity to be considered here. Also, we were asked what were the eventual reductions in biogenic methane which might be required. Now that's in a context where the biogenic methane is going through a slightly different track with Heika Wakanoa, which is the group of the agriculture people who are looking at how they might measure on-farm greenhouse gas emissions. And they are developing a parallel system and at this stage are not in the emissions trading system. However, if they fail to come up with something, they will be included within the emissions trading system. And that was the agreement that the previous government made. And sort of where we're sitting is that that part of that is outside of our mandate, but we do also consider biogenic methane in our emission reductions because everybody's in this together. and they all need to be, all our emissions need to be reduced. So what we did was, in preparing the advice, was we started with the targets in the legislation, and we developed a number of scenarios of the future. We developed a base case of what the scenarios were, what the current situation was, and then looked at a range of other scenarios for the future and how we might reduce emissions to meet those targets. So it was like a bounded discussion. It was bounded by the targets, and we looked at a range of pathways for meeting those. So our advice is a proposal, and it's in draft form, and it's out for consultation. And we will be following the closing of the submissions on the 28th of March. We will be going through to see how the submissions might influence what our advice will finally be to government at the end of May. So the sorts of questions we had to ask ourselves were, is it ambitious enough? Is it fair and equitable with the how we manage the impacts across society? And we had to look at distributional impacts on different groups in society as well, and also whether it's technically feasible, whether the advice is technically feasible, and whether it's economically feasible as well, and also whether it can be achieved through policy. So we had to balance up a number of these considerations. Now, if you go to the next slide, we'll just show you what the picture looks like. Now, as you can see, the emissions are shown in the first column, the hatched blue column, 1918 emissions, and the current policies out to 2035 get us to the 27.4 net emissions, which of course includes sequestration through forestry. The 39.7 is the gross emissions that we're addressing, and each of these bar graphs show the different sectors in what they're achieving. Okay, so emission reductions of 6 megatons carbon, and then the 12.3 is the forestry. Now, our path out to 35 is as shown in the next part of the slide, and it shows the contribution of each of the sectors. Now, I won't go into all of them, but broadly, we made a decision that we wanted to maximize direct carbon emissions. And that is because once they're mitigated, they're permanent. And so we were very concerned to see that there was permanent emission reductions. And the transport sector has had the biggest increase in emissions in recent years. And so we focused on what could be done there. And that is in two parts. We wanted to see a fast adoption of technology change. And in this case, we have looked at EVs, electric vehicles, and also hybrid electric are included within that. And we're very concerned that people will continue to buy internal combustion engines. So signalling that there's going to be a shift early is really important, because it's quite a task to get EVs into the country, taken up by people, affordable for people, and so on. And so that was the first sort of focus. The other focus was reducing the form of urban form, the way we manage our activities in life, the public transport, and the sharing of vehicles was also a focus. So that this was not all about EVs, it's also about having our activities undertaken in a way where we reduce the use of motor vehicles or mobility via motor vehicles, and increase the amount of public transport. And an integrated public transport system might contribute to that. So that was sort of basically the transport sector. The heat industry and power sector is also a biggie, where there needs to be a start of reduction of use, particularly of coal, in process heat, and that's principally across the primary sector, dairy particularly, who have high demand for process heat, and for fossil fuel use generally in other applications. So principally commercial and public buildings and so on. And the electrification of the transport sector would be contributing to that. So that was a pretty big, part of the reductions. Now, we also looked at the agricultural long-lived gases of nitrous oxide, and have identified areas where the agriculture sector, particularly dairy, can reduce their livestock numbers but retain their productivity. And that was modelled, and we understand that the primary sector, we've talked to the primary sector, and those productivity gains are going to help us get to some of the reductions. We also looked at the F gases, the chlorofluorocarbons that are used as refrigerants and so forth, and there's some small savings in that group of gases as well. And for forestry, we took a somewhat different tack from previous advice, and looked particularly at how we could reduce the need for more forestry to sequester carbon, because we want to reduce direct emissions. And we also wanted longevity. And the win-win there is the establishment of more native forests, permanent native forests, that can increase New Zealand's biodiversity. So there's a co-benefit, and also reduce the need for carbon sequestration through exotic forests. But we also looked at how the exotic forests could be maintained permanently. And of course, there are lots of issues around that. But we're looking at a shift, if you like, away from forestry over time and into native forestry. So the next slide, that's just a very once over lightly on our budget. But the next slide is really the role of local government in delivering on the emissions budgets. Now, I understand that all of you in the urban part of your Mayoral Forum will be interested in the transport and those sorts of areas, but you're also dependent on your hinterlands and the economic activity that goes through your port and so forth. So we see local government having a number of levers in the land use change area. There's the role of the Resource Management Act, the role of your farm plans that you work with your local people on, your local farmers, for example, and your foresters. You also have a key role in waste management, and we have a number of recommendations around waste and about reduction at source, recovery, and the use of the waste levy to support those processes. I've mentioned transport and urban design, but there's a couple of issues that would be very useful to get some sort of feedback from you, either through formal submission or through a little bit of discussion now, is how best to align government policy between central and local government, and how we can monitor the emissions reductions when a lot of these are happening at the regional and district level. And we have the only link we have in our legislation is to be able to request information from you through the minister. And this will be essential for us, the Commission, to be able to monitor the government's progress towards meeting the budgets. And this will be a mechanism to hold the government to account, but there's a very strong link between your roles and your emission reduction accounting and the government's. So I think that's probably enough at this stage in terms of the detail. And I'd be very happy to take questions, and Sally's there too to answer anything. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a question from Mayor Steve in Rotorua.
Yes, welcome, Judy, and it's lovely to have you in that seat.
Hello.
Well done, and great to have the Commission. Do you have a link with the iwi Climate Change Commissioner, Donna Awatiri?
Not a direct link, no, we don't. We've been working through the iwi Leaders Climate Change Group.
Yes.
Yeah, which is
she's based here in Rotorua now, Judy.
Right.
So very linked in with our iwi entities here. But that was just a question, and that linking could be quite useful later, you know, as we advance. Look, it's really just a statement that we've got a climate change action plan. We're prepared to measure our emissions. And I think if once we've all got that developed at the sub-regional level, absolutely feeding it into the regional level and to you is the way for us to go, I believe, here. And the other one is through our regional transport plan, we've done a big push as mayors of the region to look at modal shifts, to look at rail as a feasibility. And Waka Kotahi are very focused on the roads and cycling and walking. And we're struggling a little bit, Mayor Gary Weber will probably support here and others, to get rail onto the agenda because it's not a business case there. So that would be hugely helpful for us for freight and getting the trucks off the road. So that's just a linkage there. If you could help us there with a nudge, that would be fantastic.
Thank you very much. One question I have in reply is, what's the timing of your climate change strategy and your transport plan in terms of getting to the implementation?
Well, we're just putting it out. The regional plan is just out for feedback during the LTP process.
Right.
Yeah, so. Yeah, and we've adopted the action plan.
Okay, that's great. So it can start to influence policy decisions that the council makes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Anybody else? Yes, Steve?
Kia ora, Judy. It's Steve O'Sullivan. I'm the Chief Executive at Whakatane District Council. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Kia ora. Thank you for your presentation. Obviously, it's the issue of our time. We've got a climate change strategy and action plan that's been signed off by Council and fully consulted with the community. We're really excited about that. We're into implementation and we've got a range of activities that will be up for funding, consultation for their funding with our long-term plan. And so we'd be happy to connect with the Commission and report back up in any way we can and align ourselves. My question is about community activation, because I think the response to climate change significantly will come from community action rather than top down. There's also going to be a huge amount of work done from the bottom up, and obviously that's where we interface, but people still don't have a good understanding of what climate change is. The average punter in the street, if I think about starting my family, what does it all mean? And they still call it global warming, and so when it gets cold, that's confusing. So how do we work with central government and the Commission to resource activation within the community and awareness raising? Because I'm concerned that there's a lot of top-down stuff, and it's all important, don't get me wrong, but how do we activate at community level and align that straight back up to central government? And almost, you know, it's almost like a wartime effort. So how do we align with you to get community activation?
Yeah, just one point I want to make first, and that is that the Commission is an advisory body and it gives advice to the government, and the decisions will be made by the government by the end of the year on an emissions reduction plan, a national emissions reduction plan. So I just want to make that clear. But having said that, we have a hook in one of our recommendations, and it's not the first time this has been said, which is around setting up some sort of a public portal, a place where consistent advice can be found, and funding for actually disseminating that information nationally. So we are very cognizant of the point you raise. It is a big issue, and it needs to be tackled front on and in a way that is affordable for everybody, and so that everyone can be included and have a better understanding of the issues. So we have got that recommendation in there. I suggest you have a look at the recommendations, and if you think they need strengthening or reframing, recasting, do make suggestions, because we're really looking for feedback before we do our final advice to government. Yes, absolutely acknowledge it's a huge problem, and it has to be addressed, and very quickly. Yeah, so thank you.
Mayor Webber?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Judy.
Good morning, Gary.
Just back to the comment that Stevie Chadwick made, which always winds me up. The problem to me is a central government perverse behaviours are working against what we're trying to achieve. And the point I'm trying to make is there is a profit motive on Kiwi Rail. And I know from my background in the dairy industry, because of Kiwi Rail's determination to push up its profit and sort of requirement, it's driving tonnage to road. And so a lot of what we've said in our regional land transport plan is predicated on a movement to rail, but rail is actually forcing. So you know, government's got this profit requirement, which seems at odds to what you're trying to achieve. And to me, it's a central government issue to fix.
Yeah, that's a really interesting issue, Gary. Thank you for raising it. There are a number of these perverse incentives in the system, and that's not the only one. And we have a recommendation about better aligning the objectives in legislation, and we're collecting together. I mean, electricity is the other one, and the organisation and feedback and incentives that work in some cases in an opposite direction to what we're really wanting. So we're very aware about the rail issue, and there are a number of ways of tackling it. And I don't know, we'd be interested to hear from you, Gary, about, with your experience, how you might actually, you know, is it shifting that incentive you talk about, or is it something else that needs to happen? You know, what are the range of ways that we could get better incentives to leverage shift to rail for freight?
Well, it's a supplementary, if I could comment on that, Judy, is that it has to be a whole of government financial analysis. The cost of building roads to accommodate more trucks to shift the freight and reducing the capacity on the rail, that financial analysis says that it's just illogical what government's trying to do. So look at the whole cost to the network and the wider package, not just look at them individually.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a really, really good and useful comment. And certainly something that the institutional arrangements that can enable us to reduce our emissions have to be part of the package. And we've accepted that and acknowledged that. And we just got to get that tweaked right. So if you've got some particular ideas, it would be great if you put in a submission, that'd be terrific.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
From a small rural council's point of view, this Mayor Lynn from Opotiki, the big concern for us would be aligning around waste management. Our costs have skyrocketed around waste management just over the last 2 years especially, which has meant considerable rate increases just to deal with waste. And I don't think that central government is finding a balance or enough solutions for everybody to be working towards. Because we actually have to truck our waste away from our district. The recycling is absent, it's gone AWOL. We are recycling. In fact, we're storing recycling because there's nothing that we can possibly be doing with our recycle. The cost of us moving our waste is ridiculous on a small community.
Which community?
Opotiki.
Okay.
So if you could imagine that just to get our rubbish 2 hours through our district and then, what, 5 hours onto the Coromandel? Trucked through. This is our reality. And even though the amount of money that comes back as a levy has gone up, it's nowhere close to managing the gap between what we have to deal with. And I think it just comes to the higher problem of central government funding for local government doing their services like this. There's a big rift.
Yeah.
And I would like to say I'm very pleased with my mayoral decision to have a hybrid car this time round as my vehicle.
Okay.
We've already saved a lot in fuel.
Which just get rid of the battery.
Any other comments? Yes. Chair Doug from the Regional Council.
Good morning. Yes, so I'm the chair of the Regional Council. Look, I think the comment you made in regards to your recommendations, the biggest challenge you've got, and this is a formidable challenge, is the technical and the economic feasibility of what you're suggesting. And some of the issues that Mayor Gary put on the table in terms of the prioritisation of transport is one. But essentially, whilst we pride ourselves in terms of having a large percentage of renewable energy by way of electricity, the economic reality is that that is subject to the climatic variabilities that we have as a nation. And once we start as a wider community, and I think Mary Dillon made the point, this whole issue has to be owned by the community across the country. But once we start challenging the very quality of the standard of living of our communities, that's when you're going to run into trouble. So for instance, as I said, whilst we pride ourselves in terms of renewable energy, currently New Zealand, in terms of meeting the demand for generating electricity outside of the flat demand that geothermal gives us and the variable demand that renewable in terms of water gives us, we import coal.
Yep.
And we import it from Indonesia.
Dirty coal.
So the easiest way to awaken the community is to say, we're not going to do that anymore. But when people want to switch on the jug at 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning and the power's not there, that's when we challenge the community in terms of their appetite to absorb what we're all trying to achieve. I'll just be interested in your comment, and it gets back to the economic and the technical feasibility of what's being suggested.
Yeah, okay, no, that's a really perceptive comment, thank you. I think I'd answer it this way by saying that in some respects we have no choice. The climate is getting worse and it will get even worse. And we have that by excellent authority across global science, and we haven't seen the half of it yet. And the question is that there is a large imperative to do something, and that means reducing direct carbon emissions in the first instance. Now, that then is a question of, well, how do we do it? And what we're proposing is quite transformational. It is ambitious, but the advice we've given for the first 3 budget periods is to set us on a path that we can achieve the targets that are in the statute. Those targets that are not yet reviewed in any way, they were given to us and we are working within those targets. Now, they may not be ambitious enough, and many people have said that, but what we're doing is trying to get us on a path of not turning back to relying on carbon. And that's why our opportunity to set in place some quite significant changes. Now, they're not going to be comfortable for everybody. There will be winners and there will be losers. And what we're trying to identify in the report is what are the things that we can do that can get us going immediately, do these funding reforms that Gary, you mentioned, that are absolutely necessary to get all the incentives operating in the right direction so they don't go cancelling each other out, get that stuff sorted and get people a range of choices that they can make that will get us on the path. Now, if we don't do this now, the adjustment further down the track is going to be much more chaotic and would have to be done very quickly. I've just been privy to the sea level rise information through my IPCC role, and I tell you, it's not a pretty picture. You'll hear about it in about 6 months. But it means that we need to be making adjustments because those impacts of climate are built into the system now. We can't avoid those, and so we're going to have to put money into adaptation as well, very significant funding into adaptation to deal with it. So this is sort of painting the picture really of how we have to make these adjustments, and we have to bring the public along with us. And that comes back to the point that was raised about having better information and having the public understand the need for pretty transformational change, really. But we have to start somewhere. So, but look, coming back to your technical and economic feasibility, most of the recommendations that are made in here are technically feasible. We know them now. We've known them for decades. And economically feasible, well, we had COVID and the money was found. And I would draw a parallel between COVID impacts and climate change impacts. And in fact, there's very parallel, you know, they are huge impacts, but we don't have a vaccine for climate change, but we do for COVID. Now, we don't know if it works yet, and it may not, but it's a similar sort of problem. And so we make our contribution internationally to this, and also we do what we can at home, which is within the economic capacity and technical capacity. So number one, the technical feasibility is there. The economic feasibility becomes what are the government's priorities? What are New Zealanders' priorities, and what are they prepared to spend their money on?
Oh, sorry, Judy.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Sally. I just wanted to add to this discussion too, because I think what you've said is really crucial about the needing to bring the community along with you, and there are going to be really real impacts for a lot of people in New Zealand. One of the principles that we've really tried to use underlining all of our work to get to the point where we've got with this advice, and if people think we've got that balance wrong in submissions, we really want to hear about it. But one of our fundamental principles has been around avoiding unnecessary cost as we're working out what we believe the pathway should be, and that includes things like not retiring infrastructure earlier than it needs to be retired, replacing emissions intensive assets on the most natural cycle possible, so that some of those real costs that could happen with a very sudden transition can be avoided. So we've really tried to bring that thinking into the process as we've developed our advice. And as Judy mentioned in her presentation as well, one of the key questions we've been asking ourselves in developing this advice is how can the impacts of what we're advising be managed or largely managed, and that's impact on communities, different regions. We're really aware that the impacts will vary hugely between different regions in New Zealand, depending on the nature of those communities and the nature of the industries that support those communities. So these are questions we've really been trying to make, to balance these different judgments and with our advice, and hopefully that has come through. But if you believe we haven't got that balance quite right, then we really want to hear about it in your submissions.
Thanks, Sally.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Judy Lawrence and Sally, thank you very much for the information that you have put forward to us and the challenge to us as to how we can help. We appreciate your time, and thank you for the presentation.
Good. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. And if you like to put up the last slide, it's got the details for making a submission. There you go. So till the 28th of March, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Right, that'll go out. That'll go out to us all. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
And now, goodbye. We're going to have morning tea so things don't get too cold.
Chair, can I just ask a question? We've got that down there. Are we going to do this as a submission from Bay of Plenty as a region, or we're going to do it as from a Potiki, little old Potiki, and little old Kawerau, and little old Tauranga, and everybody goes trotting off and sits down to a select committee and gets bloody castigated as usual, and then all send home and say, thank you very much, we've already got it sorted. They've asked such a practical bloody question that didn't get answered. And it pisses me off because we're going around in circles here. It really does. It's just bloody annoying me.
Yep.
You know?
Fiona may be able to answer your question now.
Please.
Yes, it's a very good news story that there is technical working group across council that are working together on a regional submission. So that will come to your councils for you to endorse. So we're looking towards putting together a regional submission to go. There's a number of staff across councils working on this. It may be that you also want to do your own submission, but that's what's occurring in the background now.
So that will come to us before the 28th?
Absolutely.
Okay. The other thing is, I mean, the transport one, we've talked about this so many times now, and I know Steve Bang's on about transport on rail from Rotorua, one of the most heaviest transport. Hold on. You have to say, Steve, I'm going to have mine now. I'm not mocking you, just listen to me, please. What I'm saying though, is there's one problem we've got with transport on rail from Kawerau to Tauranga, and it's a simple one. A tonne is a tonne. A tonne of timber or a tonne of logs, and that's where the variation is. And you're going to have people that they're going to cut timber in Kawerau, and they're going to pay twice as much to send that as they do logs. They're not going to use their train. They're going to use road. That's a simple deduction. And we've been talking about this, when Stuart Crosby was the mayor. And it's still not going anywhere. It's still banging our heads against the wall with a whole lot of clowns in Kiwi Rail. So that's what it was when Kawerau was set up. And it's not going to work. It's not going to work. People in Kawerau, they're there to make money. And if they have to, they'll just drive trucks over the top of all your infrastructure and get to the port. Simple.
Okay, thank you. And now I'm going to break for morning tea. We will come back in, and I'm sorry, Gary, I guess that's a goodbye from you because it's almost 11:15. We'll have 15 minutes for morning tea. That's all right with everybody.
Yes, no, thank you, and hopefully there's no round of applause when I leave.
End of the meeting, and we will be having one person coming in to take a photo, as long as that's okay, of us gathered here. It's not often we have a Mayoral forum in our chambers, so you'll know when to not be chewing muffins or something in that. But thank you very much. Welcome back to our session, and we're moving over to a presentation from Jeff Williams. Oh, Fiona's going to introduce? Right, thank you. Sorry.
Look, I'll introduce and say Good morning to everybody, and thanks for getting this on the agenda. Welcome, Ezra. Nice to have you here in support of this. And just overarching, a lot of the comments made by the Commissioner for the Environment actually nudged me into thinking a lot of the metrics that we're going to present today are very closely linked to climate change. And when we had the floods in Nongataha, 98 families were displaced. So it shows us that this is also one of the inputs that is skewed where we find ourselves today. But we also put it in a regional concept. So I'll get Jeff to give us the overview.
I do apologise, Mayor Steve. I've jumped the gun and come to you before we were just going to have a quick climate change update from Fiona, following on from the presentation from Dr. Judy. My apologies, that is my mistake. I listened to my instructions and then got them back to front. So we're just going to take a step back and go back to climate change impacts for the Bay of Plenty, and then I will come back to Jeff and Ezra. I do apologise once again. Thanks, Fiona.
And Mayor Chadwick has done such a great introduction to this presentation, and so did Dr. Judy Lawrence. This is a very good news story in terms of how the region is working together on climate change, and that we're making steps here. And when we look at how well we work regionally, we work well regionally where it's a crisis, or where the opportunity is to benefit is bigger than all of us combined. And this is certainly the case with climate change. I put up this first slide, which will need no introduction in terms of the likely climate change impacts to the Bay of Plenty. And many parts of the region are already responding, and Whakatane District Council talked about their action plan. Mayoral Lakes Council has a climate change action plan. Te Arawa has a climate change action plan, and there's some really good examples. Auckland Council is a very good example, Wellington City Council, and so we're all in this together, and we are responding as local government. In terms of what we're doing in the Bay of Plenty, we have a range of things. We are working on locally led approaches to create low carbon economies and ensure the Bay of Plenty is adapting to the changing climate. We're doing this together. We're all in this together. In terms of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, we have a number of projects that we've funded. Many of those projects are around supporting TLAs to work together. We've done a report on climate change projections and the impact. We're now looking to look at it on a sub-regional and local basis. So you can get the information you need in your areas. We've had workshops with iwi and with councils to share findings, discuss current work and agree where we can collectively add value. From that, we've established a technical working group, and that group is looking currently at developing a risk assessment framework for the region. Thank you, Mayor Campbell, in terms of the importance of the region coming together for a submission to the Climate Change Commission, so that's in hand as well. And so the other thing to note is that the Regional Council is currently consulting its long-term plan, and we're looking for submissions in terms of what we can do more. In response to Mayor Weber's comments earlier, this is not duplication. We do need the community to engage and act here. You see in our consultation document, we're suggesting putting $600,000 into get the community to really respond to climate change and have shared information and raise the awareness of how important this is. One of the other things that we've done is we've got a regional council staff member now on that joint NFE working group with local government. That's Jane Palmer, who's the second panel on climate change. So she'll be reporting back to you in terms of what work she's doing. She's there on behalf of the Bay. And just in terms of our our role, and Dr. Judy Lawrence talked about this a great deal, but there is a lot going on in the space for us, and clearly in terms of mitigation, we're working on that, but also in terms of adaptation. Now, adaptation is really the place for local government to shine. We all do adaptation right now, and we have to tell our story a lot better than what we have, I think. And for example, with Pakistani District Council and managed retreat, be a good time. It is a story that in today's events will be all about climate change, which is adverse weather events, meaning that people get to look to secure safety. I can talk if you would like, share in terms of the regional council what we're doing. I think the key point I want to make is it's a very good news story. We are making progress in terms of working regionally. This is a regional priority here and we will continue to do so. So really keen to enable and support locally led coordinated responses to climate change. Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
With respect, Fiona, just one thing that concerns me, and it's getting down to nuts and bolts. Who have, in my council, for instance, and this happened to us only 2 or 3 weeks ago in your chambers on the RAG group, and we had a whole lot of people there telling us what was going to go on, and there were a whole lot of mayors in the room that didn't even know who was actually representing them on that group. I think Mayor Bristol, you didn't even know the person involved in yours, didn't you? And I certainly wasn't aware of it. All I'm just saying is, who are we talking to in colour?
Yeah, and talk to us about that and then make sure.
We don't have that current.
So we haven't got it. Okay, oh, that's, I don't know what's that. Yeah.
I've already seen the text message actually.
Okay, thank you. I mean, don't get me wrong. I want to save the planet just as much as anybody else. Probably a bit late for me and probably a few others around this table, but I've got grandchildren growing up and I'm thinking, where the hell is the world going to be for them? I have to say though, as a diesel burning motorist, I do have some concerns about, and we talked about electric vehicles and stuff like that. I have some concerns about what are you going to do with all these lithium batteries at the end of it all? Because they only last for 10 years. Are we going to have a dump for them, or is it all going to be chucked out just like all the other batteries and the likes? So it's something we've got to do now rather than when it happens. You know what I mean?
Yes, and I was talking about the Circular Lakes Council yesterday as we were presenting on our long-term plan. There is requirements to decarbonise our vehicle fleet, including public transport. That's coming this year, this national direction. We are looking at hydrogen as a fuel as well as electrification. You will recall that the Regional Council did fund 5 electric buses as part of its public transport contracts. And for some of the reasons you're talking about, that's a sustainable way forward for those public transport vehicles. So Auckland Transport has already got a hydrogen bus piloted, and particularly in the Bay of Plenty, we're well placed to look at hydrogen fuel as a future for large vehicles.
Tell me if I'm wrong here. Wasn't Christchurch doing that sometime? Yeah, they've been using hydrogen.
So Christchurch has been looking at small electric pods. But my understanding, the next hydrogen public transport bus is currently running.
Question from Mayor Steve.
Yeah, thank you. And apologies to my mayor from Kawerau. I was actually chipping in support, but yep, I'll shut up. Come on, yeah. On this one, Fiona and Doug, I think this is absolutely perfect territory for a regional overview and also the regional reporting back. So you could take it a little bit further about collating the sub-regional monitoring and where we're at, and act as that regional lead. This is one that it makes such logical sense for us.
Yes.
I think Community Tablet will organise that as well.
Yeah. Totally in agreement with that. Yes, thank you. Anybody else from around the table? Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, Fiona. Welcome, Ezra. And Jeff.
Oh, just, if I can, I'll just share the screen, which o tēnā koutou katoa, koutou raurenga tirama o tēnei rohi o tātou, tēnā koutou, kia ora hui o tātou. Look, this is a piece of work that was firstly done for Rotorua with help from the central government agencies, and so you'll forgive Ezra and I, and that it has actually got a little bit of a Rotorua focus because of the research that's actually been undertaken. Having said that, I think what it will provide is a glimpse as to what does our area in fact look like in terms of the Bay of Plenty. I think the presentation's been circulated previously, so I'll assume that you've got access to this data. This is the...
Just a moment on that, Jeff. Could you hold tight? We've got one.
Yep.
Did anybody else get this?
You emailed through last night and I didn't get access to the page.
I'll read it off there.
Can you bring that up on your page? And I will pass this to you.
It's all right,
We can read it off there.
I just might want to have closer so that you can actually. You good with that? Yep. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay.
Could I also ask, sorry, just in a second moment, are you able to maximise it and put it as a slideshow? We can see it better that way.
So you
Click on the right hand icon down at the bottom closest to the slide bar, and you just click your way through.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Kia ora. So this first slide is looking at a glimpse of basically people in a situation where they're in emergency accommodation and what that looks like across the district. You'll see that there are, for each area, there are 3 bars. These are the number of Māori, Pacific Islander adults, the number of New Zealand European, and then the black bar, which is of particular significance, I think, is to the number of children. At Rotorua at the moment, there are 389 children as of today, actually growing up in motels. We've got a meeting, and Ezra may wish to comment on this. We've got a meeting today with a number of central government officials, and this is something that the mayors may wish to actually consider. In Rotorua, fundamentally what we're going to be saying is that during the lockdown period at level 4, the solution of using motels was acceptable. We needed people off the street, and so motels became a viable accommodation alternative. However, today, what we've got are people now living in motels for more than 6 months. Now, these are families with 2 or more children, and the thought in Rotorua is that motel accommodation was designed and consented for short-term tourist accommodation. Typically, motel units don't have full kitchen facilities. Motels don't have necessarily good laundry or washing facilities. And they certainly don't have areas that children can play. So what we have are children growing up in motel accommodation where the range slider opens out into a car park in a concrete pad. And fundamentally what we're going to be saying to the government agencies today, that is totally unacceptable. The next slide, this tells a story about Rotorua, and again, forgive me for this because it is Rotorua centric. But in terms of alternative emergency accommodation, there are currently, over the last 3 years, there's been 42 homes that have been built. There's 23 in the pipeline, 606 people on the register waiting, which means that in order to address this, if you actually talk about motels, in order to address this, we need hundreds of new homes now. So the question is about hotel use from our point of view is that we believe that we've got to act in a way now to actually bring an end to motels, that we work with motel owners to say, if you wish to continue down this pathway, we want to work with you with central government to see your facility being removed as a motel and become a accommodation facility, which is developed. There's some investment done to ensure that rooms are suitable for medium, longer term accommodation use. There's a reconsenting process and also a process whereby people are placed appropriately into motel accommodation. At the moment, it's a little bit of a free-for-all. That means that in a motel, you may have in one room a family or a whānau accommodated, and in another room next door, a single male with multiple and sometimes complex social and drug alcohol issues. And on the other side, you may have a gang member. So this free-for-all placement into motels is totally unacceptable. It's got to be a much more measured approach. So a movement away from motels, not necessarily from those facilities. We still may use facilities which were motels. I'm not saying that we're going to put people out on the street. What we're saying that over a short period of time, we've got to work with current owners of motels to see them refurbished, repurposed and consented to be suitable medium-term accommodation options. So that's where we are on the motel issue. And you can see from the numbers of social houses through being developed pipeline that there's total mismatch to actually the need as opposed to the numbers. Ezra, just hands to you there if you've got comments.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Steve, and everyone else in here. I think the slide that Jeff has put together in many ways tells you have people challenges on various fronts here in the Bay of Plenty, and of housing and the ability to provide safe communities is probably one that's
We've lost you, Ezra. Ezra, you're frozen. If you can hear us.
Yeah, I can hear you. I guess sorry, my apologies. The issue of housing and tackling it on various fronts is something that's really critical. And so I do want to acknowledge the work that all the CEs are doing to tackle the issue of deprivation together. From a central government point of view, there's no doubt that the way forward is, yes, these are regional issues, but actually the solutions have to lie at a local community level and almost by street level. So one of the things that we are really quite keen to work with you alongside is with councils, with local communities about having more of a bespoke approach about how we tackle this together. That's something that I certainly probably say that all of our agencies are really quite keen on being able to do. So, probably that's all I have to sort of say at this point, Jeff.
So the next slide is another view, and this is a post-COVID view. It's looking at work-ready recipients. Now, this is not the total number of people. These are people that are work-ready. They want to be working, and they've been displaced from work as a result of COVID-19 and the impacts of it. you can see some commonality across these last two slides. The blue bar are Māori, green New Zealand European, and black is Pacific Island. You can see across the last two slides, those families or people in emergency accommodation is predominantly Māori. It's an 85% Māori issue. And then on the work ready recipients, you can see the impact there again is hugely within our Māori community. So this is particularly for those who are a challenge, and that if you take the work ready recipients and put them all together, effectively 60% of the unemployment problem in the Bay of Plenty at the moment sits within Rotorua alone. So for our community, this is not an insignificant problem. But you can also see, when you look up the makeup of work ready recipients across the other localities, Kawerau, Pōreke particularly, Whakatane, you can see Taupo would be the same, even Tauranga Western Bay. There is a significant unemployment issue for work ready recipients within our Māori communities at the moment. This slide is one that I didn't want really to show, and I didn't want to have out there in the general public. This is looking at crime victimization. Now, what we've done here is that we've taken crime victimization and we've ranked all of our TLAs. And so this is out of 66. So number one is the best place to live if you want to avoid being a victim of crime, you'd be in number one. And if you are looking to be in a place that you don't want to be, don't be at 66. So unfortunately, the Rotorua district sits at 66. We've got the highest rate of crime victimisation in the country currently. If you look across those numbers, actually a lot of our TLAs in the Bay of Plenty sit at a fairly high victimisation rate overall, which doesn't tell necessarily a positive story. Now, I didn't want to go through a huge number of metrics because there are many of them. And what I have got for each of the localities across the Bay of Plenty, all of these metrics. So mean tested benefit, home ownership, child education, adults with no qualifications, all of these metrics are available. But when you combine them, they combine into what's called the dynamic deprivation index, which is an index that actually covers and amalgamates all of these measures. And I'm just going to show you what that actually looks like. Now, again, forgive me, because this is just a Rotorua deep dive and a Tauranga City deep dive at this particular point. And this is on the dynamic deprivation index. The somewhat colourful tile in the middle, if you go from left, which is blue, to right, which is red, the blue is an indicator of actually the top level households in our community. The red is actually going down to 10 are those households where there is significant deprivation. You can see for Rotorua that the deprivation index overall is sitting at 9, 27% of our population at worst, which is at the worst level, which is level 10. And we've actually had no improvement of that over the last 8 years. Now that's corresponding to Tauranga, for example, which is sitting at an average around 4, with 3% at level 10. Good improvement over the last 8 years. Now, really worrying though, is that tile in the centre, because you can see for Rotorua that we've got a small percent of our population relatively in that blue area. Those are those are households where there is a level of I guess wealth that allows them to be living above poverty. However, when you start moving from left to right, you quickly slide into the deprivation indexes. So in other words, you move immediate drop from level 3 immediately almost to level 6, and then from level 6 quickly to level 8, 9, and 10. So that's meaning that we've got large parts of our population living in deprivation. And in fact, what we haven't got any longer is a middle ground. Now that's compared with Tauranga, where you can see that the blue actually extends across the tile at much more greater. There's a much smaller red level. So what you haven't got is that wealth distribution is much more even, and it's sort of much broader across the population. Whereas when you look at Rotorua as an example, we've got much more extreme wealth going on here and a much greater level of deprivation with very little middle ground in between them. Now, if you drill further and look at this across the Bay of Plenty, now if you look at Rotorua, this is again using that TLA ranking. Actually here, Rotorua, unlike victimization, is not at the bottom of the pile. We're in fact 57 as opposed to the 66 or 67 numbers. Unfortunately, looking at the black elliptic, which has been drawn, you can see Rotorua, Kawerau, Whakatane, Poraki, in terms of dynamic deprivation, ranking very much at the bottom area, bottom levels in that dynamic deprivation groups. And also, Gareth, with Taupo, you'll already know this, that Taupo actually isn't from the distribution, is also actually at that sort of area of concern. Comparatively, we've got a contrast through to Tauranga and Western Bay, and you saw that already when you compare the populations. The interesting thing about that previous slide, and I'll just go back to it for a moment, is that if you can look at the Rotorua tile, that tile is very much emulated when you start drilling down into Whakatane, Poraki, and Kawerau. Those populations look even almost more extreme than the one that you've actually seen, or you do see for Rotorua. Look, the conclusions from all of this, I can provide, and we've been doing a lot of research on this, and we can provide and circulate the numbers. But I think what we can see from this data, that it very much underlines the disparity in social conditions across the different communities in the Bay of Plenty. We're not all the same. The other key point that comes across is the significant inequity at the moment for our Māori populations and for Māori children. It's, I think to say that it's a concern would be a significant understatement. And it reflects, lastly, the last thing, and I think I heard Ezra give voice to this, that there's no answer, there's no central answer here. The answer has to be community by community, working alongside and in partnership with the regional council and with central government agencies to try and actually come up with interventions and solutions that are actually going to work for those communities. This is not really new, actually. Although COVID has had a huge impact, the sort of directions and the sort of issues that we're seeing here in these slides are well known and important. What is new, though, is that I think what we've seen is a movement backwards as a result of COVID, and even further highlighting the need for urgent local action and partnership. So that's it. And I'll hand over to
And just quickly, in conclusion, this data really shocked us when Jeff articulated, and you'll see it was .love's data, which was Justin Lester's group that provides the disaggregated data that we've never been able to get when we just get regional data. It's so hard to get the breakdown by TLA, and so .love's data is really quite rich for us to actually see the real picture. And what we say in conclusion is what we've been doing for 10 years is just not working. In fact, we're going backwards. So we need a social disruptor here, and it has to be with iwi and with central government in partnership, and that's what we're calling for here locally. We've got to just move the metrics here, and we're proposing a leadership centre, and I want to put my hand up to say I'll lead, and we'll get the right people around the table and make the difference. So thank you for hearing the data.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to say, Mayor Steve, were you shocked? I just want you to clarify your extent of shock here. Was it that you, sorry, were you that you were shocked about your own statistics?
Yeah, we knew it was bad. We knew it was bad before, and those of us that are on the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, you know, have been baying for not getting bay-wide data. We also then heard some announcements from government about more houses, and we thought this is great, and then realised not many of those are in Rotorua. The Bay is getting 1,000 more. You know, so we needed to break things down to our TLA sub-region. I was deeply shocked, and very shocked about the children. That's the space that we're using to build a proposition for government too.
Thank you. Speaking from a Portuguese point of view, and I'm not sure how Whakatane and Kawarau feel, but the statistics that you have shown us, we have known and been working around for a long time. And we've always known that we are behind the New Zealand average in almost everything. And one statistic I think would be quite useful for this forum to look at is apparently the average of social housing in New Zealand for your housing stock sits at 3.5%. And I just wondered whether or not we know what our housing stock percentage is. I know that Opotiki sits at just under 2%, which if you then look at the numbers within our own area, we're saying we actually needed 185 more new houses, social housing, in order to get us even close to the national average. And I think with these statistics, we also need to delve a little more into giving the correct information, especially around housing. If this is something we all desperately need to work towards, we need that information as well.
Yeah. And Lynn, on that, when we started the partnership with government we had to go through a place-based assessment, which was quite a good due diligence step actually to look at what the real need is. And we've identified that we need 1,700 homes, and they're not built overnight. So we've been working closely with those government agencies and also our own spatial plan about where the capability to build is. So we know all of that, and that's been good background work that we had to do about the housing partnership. Yeah.
Can I just touch on an issue that I lead on, and that is that I think one of the things that we've learned is that what we need is not only local solutions but integrated solutions. And The motel example that I alluded to was that it sounds a good solution to put people temporarily into motels who haven't got accommodation, and you know, it stands to reason that, and I think some people have even said that at least that's better than living in a car. The flip side of that, though, is that when you've got the high numbers of people living in motels, actually what you're doing is that unless you manage it, you create a whole lot of perverse outcomes. And those perverse outcomes range from children being placed into completely unsuitable living arrangements and potentially being subject to a level of abuse that they actually weren't subject to previously. By that I mean that we, for example, had a case about 3 weeks ago now where a gang member, there was an altercation in one of the motels, which actually spilled through into a family that was actually in that same environment. And that happened basically because mixed placement of people that should not be being placed together in a motel. So there needs to be much more active management about who is placed into these facilities. The second point is that, you know, I've already covered, is that motels are not suitable long-term living arrangements for people. And if they're in them for 6, 12 months or more, that's effectively something that we should not actually be condoning. The last point is that we've got a very odd situation happening in Rotorua at the moment, whereby our worst buildings imaginable in terms of accommodation providers are now the most valuable. Our best buildings, our newest hotels, our newest motels, who have actually not moved into emergency accommodation agreements, are now struggling and are likely to fall over potentially. So what we have are the least in the past, our least worst available buildings for motel accommodation use are now worth multi-millions of dollars because of the contracts that are actually being provided within them. Whereas our best facilities are almost worth nothing and are likely to close imminently because there's very few people going through them. And so the economic perverse outcome of this is of significance. Now, the problem that we have is that no one intended this. All of our government agencies are actually trying to do the right thing and are working within the policy parameters that they have available to them. The problem, though, is unless you work together at a local level, you never get to understand the potential for perverse or unanticipated outcomes that can accrue as a result of siloed interventions. And so really this example really speaks volumes as to the importance of actual local collaboration to really get to understand the local ecosystem of the problem you're dealing with, and then to intervene in a way that is holistic and understands what you're trying to achieve and doesn't have these perverse negative outcomes attached.
Thank you, Jeff. I now have a queue of people, so we'll hear from the Honourable Chair Anne, followed by Ezra, and followed by Mayor Judy.
Thank you, and kia ora. It's a bit unusual to be sitting here. Hi, Ezra. I just wanted to congratulate you, Steve, on producing those statistics. They are incredibly helpful. I have to concur with Mayor Lynn that they are not a surprise for Portuguese Eastern Bay, but yours are a surprise. I knew they were bad, but I didn't realise they were that bad. But the interesting thing for me is that there hasn't been much change on your stats for Rotorua between, 13 and 18.
Yep.
But Tauranga, Tauranga there is quite a change, and quite a significant change. And so we would be quite interested in trying to get underneath that with you to see what is happening, see if we can identify what is happening. And can I also say that one of the problems I think we're all grappling with that we may be able to work collaboratively with
with central government is how do we enable papakainga housing, development of multi-owned Māori land? How do we assist community groups to develop some of that social housing? I mean, we're grappling with it. I know Whakatane's grappling with it, particularly Māori land, and there may well be something that we can agree on regionally, and we're talking with Western Bay, just so that we have to try and align our policies for the groups that don't work to our TA boundaries. But congratulations on a really, really good piece of work, kia ora.
Thank you, Anne, and nice that you're there. And there is some great leverage for us in the wider region. Actually, we've got Rawiri Waititi, who's interested in this and should be, Tamati, who's very close to this and is as well briefed right through this process, and that's great for us in the region. And we've got some great capability that Jeff's brought on to council about working with the aspirations of Te Tata o Te Arawa, our partnership board, and they have got a housing strategy that is, we need to make sure we work together on that. So I think we could share some of the learnings that we're getting as we go with the government agencies about the policy parameters in which they work, and where we need to shift that dial so that we can open up papakainga, open up land that iwi own and lease to own options and things like that that are really big around this district.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ezra.
Thank you, Lynn and Chair, and lovely to see you again in this context, Anne. I just really wanted to briefly a couple of comments that both Mayor Steve and Jeff has said. That absolutely, I think there are some quite key things, and I think you just mentioned the issue of housing and so forth. There are some probably key things that we could probably tackle together with local governments, with iwi, at a regional point of view. The reality is that for some of those social issues, it is community by community. It's about working alongside you as local government as well. And so I guess my ask is that we have over the last couple of years being able to get stronger alignment across our government agencies. And so one of the things that we are really quite keen to do is that no one can do any of this mahi on their own. And so the ability to work alongside you as local government and Manawhenua and iwi, I think, is really critical. And so your support to encourage it, because I know there's some really good work happening across the rohe, I think is really critical. The second point too, that I just really want to probably endorse is Jeff's comment about an integrated approach. So yes, there are some things that are immediate, for example, housing, but also education, health, mental health, other issues as well, and access. So that real local integrated approach, I think, is really critical. Your support to do that, and so my message back to my central government colleagues is to ensure that we can work alongside you. Specific things that will be quite unique to Kaurau that might be very different than what we need to do in Tauranga. But I think that integrated approach, I think, is really, really critical. And so really looking forward to how we could work this together. And I think what I'd like to do is maybe take some of the key messages and the sentiment from here to relay that to my central government to support some of that work that's already happening and to really to accelerate it. Kapai.
Thank you, Ezra. And I'll just say from our point of view, the MSD secondment to our district to help around the social housing and just housing in general issue has been huge for us. We've made more inroads into trying to come to terms with what we're dealing with and how we're going to deal with it, and bringing the right people to the table for the local solution has been incredibly empowering for us to get on and get something done. So thank you for that. Me, Judy.
Thank you. I just want to mention an issue I've come across in Whakatane. Those that were housed in temporary accommodation in motels and the contract that was managed, in our case, by the Salvation Army, who micromanaged it quite closely because of the complex needs and the close proximity. Yes. And I just observed that the Housing New Zealand solutions have largely been dropping old and derelict 3 and 4 bedroom houses and building 4 to 6 units, again, very close proximity, again, available to people who have got complex needs. And that close proximity is, I've already seen and had to manage a couple of situations, but there doesn't seem to be the management there at that stage. You've got your home, be quiet, and so we've co-located people very close to each other who don't necessarily have the skills to manage those relationships well. So it's just a note for perhaps MSD or somebody to perhaps be a little bit more attentive to some of those sites to see how they're going, because I've had to create a couple of fires. I don't mean literally fires, but relationship fires.
Your point, Judy, is so right. You've got to build resilient communities. And then you have to look at the infrastructure and the roading and the stormwater. So those are all very important at a local level. Each area we've identified has to have a bespoke solution. They're quite different. So I think that's where it becomes very apparent at the local authority level. But if we can then get the attention of the right government agency, through a local approach, I think we're really going to unplug the dike a bit more.
I'm really grateful for those bills, and I don't want to sound ungrateful about it, but I'm just saying that when we build them very close together and the nature of some of the people who then end up as tenants, there's some new problems can develop that just need to be understood and managed a little bit better perhaps than they are at present.
Ezra, have you anything else to add? All good? Thank you very much.
Chair, just one thing that,
yes,
from my experience and the numbers show you that I'm probably an expert in this field. I think the most important thing that we don't become Eastern Bay or Rotorua, or even the Bay of Plenty, don't become a dumping ground for MSD recipients needing to place people. And it has happened. It's happened in Kaura for many, many years. Not now, it doesn't, because as soon as somebody comes in there, we certainly know who it is, and I'm on Mike's tail about within seconds. But even that, or people coming out of prison, can be, everybody's related to somebody in Kaura. And so they get farmed off into our area, and you only need one family to arrive, and you've got stats go through the roof and all the rest of it. So my heart goes out to Steve. I do a lot of shopping and trading in Rotorua, and I see some of those motels full of unfortunates, I call them. I don't call them undesirable, I call them unfortunate.
And what we've learned from peeling back this data, layer upon layer, actually that perception that they're all out of towners is not right. We know they asked the question at 7%. So these are largely our people who have lost their job and who were sleeping rough and in caravans and in overcrowding, who are now desperate for accommodation. But we do hear a lot of anecdote of people coming in because they've been told you'll get accommodation, but it's not the perception is not the reality, and they're monitoring that very, very closely. I also just thought you'd all enjoy seeing Mayor John Carter of the Far North's just written a letter to the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee about what they're facing in the Far North. And it reminds me very much of when Meng Foon was Mayor of over in Gisborne, and we three joined together to try to start a local leadership sort of approach to the gross inequalities that we knew in our community then, but there's so much worse now. And COVID really flushed that out.
Yes, thank you. And I think this is a topic that there's going to be a lot more discussion together and within our own regions. I think this is actually an important area for our forum to remain working collaboratively, trying to sort our local solutions. But we will leave it there and move on, please. We have a verbal update around Māori wards from Whakatane District Council.
Thank you, Neela. I just want to take this opportunity to introduce Cindy Butt, who's our new governance manager at Whakatane District Council, because I'm going to speak to what this paper that she's actually written for us and has provided us some great guidance. And I guess we raised this and put it on the agenda because we're keen to know what we're all doing across the region. Obviously, whakapapa transcends local government boundaries, and whānau are talking and they're keen to know what we're all doing. So we put on here basically as a starting point just to find out what others are thinking and doing. So just very briefly, based on the work that Cindy has been leading with us through our chamber, is that we voted in favour of Māori wards in November 2017, and that was overturned by referendum in 2018. So we were in the process of conducting a representation review as required for the 2022 election in that cycle, in a normal cycle. So we'll now we'll go back now and conduct a further round of consultation with our MPs forum and community boards, and we'll hold workshops for ourselves in May and June just to fish out what the picture might look like. Dale Voski from Election New Zealand will come and do that with us. And to understand it in a current context, to provide us with some information. We'll be doing public consultation in August and looking to make our final decision in October. So that's where we're at. We've got strong support for them in our community. There was a delegation yesterday in council chambers led by Tony Boynton, who gave a very good presentation, a very strong presentation actually. So we're expecting a really strong engagement from our community around the wards issue. So yeah. That's where we're at.
Okay. Any comments from anybody else?
So we had the same, but our Tauranga Council voted for a Mayoral ward and a petition circulated, which was reached the numbers, which has now been superseded by the legislation. So the decision will come before the Commission again in the next couple of weeks, to confirm the decision or not of the previous council. And as far as representation, we haven't even thought about that yet.
Good, thank you. And
then could I add something?
Yes, please, Mayor Steve.
Thanks. I've got Trevor sitting with us too. We've had an interesting discussion at a committee about Maori wards, and we had Warwick Lamp come to just talk through what could evolve from those that we've got on the electoral roll. And the discussion has gone back to our partnership board, to Tato, who have to look at with the whole of Te Arawa, what is the impact and what do they want. And so that will come back to us, and then we'll make our decision. It's the challenge because we've got the partnership board with 14 on it. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Okay, we'll move on. Second presentation from Whakatane District Council again. Okay, look, I just briefly wanted to bring up something that I felt about this training, minus all our crises that we've had, but just what I was expecting was that we are in a very interesting season in local government. We have some pressures on us. I think we're not the only council around our free waters and the deadlines for resource consents to expire and things like that. And I think that we've seen our LTP as transitional, that our future focus needs to be supported by some of the decisions we make in the next 3 to 6 years. And I do see that as we think what the government is signaling through the free waters reforms and other initiatives is that they really wanted to hear from us more regionally than they have in individual TAs before. And I think that we need to start thinking clearly about our regional relationship. And
and I know that we're involved in a number of meetings. We have an Eastern Bay Mayoral Forum, we have a Mayoral County Regional Forum, we have Zone 2, we have a number of ways we get together and catch up. But I think it's in this season that we're in, I'm really wanting to encourage us all to think a little bit more strategically at what happens at those meetings. Sometimes we do a bit of a BAU thing and then all go home. And I think some of that stuff, one of the things I learned about from Zoom meetings was there's some business matters that you can cover really well on a Zoom meeting. You don't need to be in the same room to get a good outcome. And there's others where you really need to be in the same room and have a really great discussion and maybe some very top level presentations. I think we've had a couple today, but even the ones we've had today have in my mind raised some other questions about bits of those presentations I didn't fully understand, and I need to be part of a decision-making process that makes submissions to central government and things like that. I made a list and I'm going to hand it out to you because I didn't want to take up too much time from this meeting, but I would like us to start to think about what sort of issues must be. I don't want us to get consumed by business as usual. I think we need to have a much bigger vision. I think we need to be thinking regionally, not just sub-regionally. I think our sub-regional relationships have been really positive, and I look at the PGF and the accolades we got from Cabinet about the fact that we work so well together as a sub-region and with our projects and back each other big time, and that was viewed as very productive. But I also think that there's an expectation, whether we like it or not, there's an expectation we start acting better regionally. I think it's got some advantages to it. We need to be identifying, as well as what the government has signalled they want to think us to think about regionally, what we also may do better if we supported each other and did some work together on. And what I'd like to do is, I want to put this up to places like Zone 2, I want to put it up to a number of forums to say, when we meet, can we please take advantage of our face-to-face opportunities to start to come and have those little harder discussions? Because remember, we just really need to socialise these ideas with our council, and then we have to socialise it with our communities in terms of the sort of changes that are coming our way. And sometimes I don't feel as well equipped, I kind of know the gist of what was wanting to be achieved, but I lack detail and I lack a strong sense we're going to be working really regionally what the rest of you think and what's likely to be what we were going to arrive. So I'm just asking us in these types of forums for the next little while that we start to step up, what I want to do is distribute a list of, literally in 3 seconds I wrote 4 or 5 things on the list. It's by no means, and as I've been sitting here in the meeting, the things like RMA reforms, waste management, climate change, affordable housing, social housing, Mayoral representation, emergency service alerts was on recently, what do we all decide there, connectivity, urban form and design, decarbonisation, energy things, land use changes, policies that align with government that they want us to get aligned, the rail issue, sea level rise, electricity generation, climate, the implications on the business community, climate change, all those huge number of things that are quite complex, and we as local leaders need to be leading in our own communities, but actually making those links where I think they would be advantageous. So I would just like, it might be a discussion you have with your own councils to sort of identify those things and then maybe we prioritise them so that we use these times. I think we had a couple of really good presentations today. I found that really helpful. It raised some more questions for me and alerts to things I thought, well, I don't understand it as well as I should. So how do I lead if I don't fully understand? So I'm just thinking, can we step past business as usual stuff? I'm not saying those things are irrelevant, but actually start to think a little bit more big picture around what I believe the direction for local government seems to be undergoing some serious change. And I'd like to think that we are up with the play and understand what that means for us. And I dare say ahead of the game a little bit in terms of our relationships with each other and the things that we could and should be doing better together and what that looks like. And so the list I'm sitting out is really to say what else should be on that list. And if you want to even try and prioritise it, if you think you've got a handle on that, that would be good as well. Okay? I think that actually ties in quite well with our
next report in our agenda so could we pause on what you brought up, because I actually think that's really relevant and important, but we'll move on to the next report with you, Fiona, on the briefing for incoming ministers, because I'm aware that in 3 minutes' time we were supposed to start our lunch and we're nowhere close to that, so please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. This report is a culmination of a number of workshops with the Bay Community executives. It came from the last Mayoral Forum where you asked us to go back and do some more work in terms of how income government will be briefed. And as Mayor Turner has said, it's seeking to identify those areas which are regionally significant. So we work very well regionally when there's a crisis or when the benefit is better when we're all together. The briefing is talking about the importance of working regionally on climate change, on social equity and on affordable housing, but recognising that local and sub-regional collaboration is important. I think the presentation from Jeff Williams and Ezra and Leah Chadwick showed the importance of local solutions to social inequity, and as Leah Leister said, bringing that together collaboratively. The briefing for incoming ministers is an opportunity to receive this and put it forward. One of the things that we've discussed at length and the CEOs have discussed is the potential for this forum to be expanded to have EV leaders come at the table with you in terms of getting traction, in terms of the outcomes that are important to your communities. So on behalf of the CEOs, I'm asking you to consider this briefing and ways of working, and also to go through to incoming ministers.
Yes, Mayor, Steve.
Well done, CEOs, because you got a racking last time, but this is quite concise. And when we've got 3 areas like this, I think that's the focus that we need to get on in this triennial. But it matches in with Judy about the other bits that we could be thinking at in the medium and long term. So these are definitely the 3 priorities that we would want to work on and share the information regionally. And then I think, Judy, we'll look at your paper. It sounded exhaustingly long, but there are some things there that I think medium term to long term, because we ought to be going out 30 years. And I had a very good discussion, I thought, the other day with Doug and Fiona about spatial planning and infrastructure. Look, it's the old argument about how many sports grounds do we need, or gym, velodromes, that sort of debate. I think we could be doing that and starting that now. And then we know infrastructure spending, where would we and how would we invest in those large infrastructure projects that we agree regionally are good for us on a targeted rate. I've got no problem with that, but we just want to be around the table there. And I think that the silo's too narrow when it's led only by Sport Bar Plenty. We don't think of those other things that we could be looking at in spatial plans. So I think that needs to come in, thinking of the medium to long term as well. But this is so much better than just, let's get the key ministers here, because when we've got these areas as our initial priority areas, that'll tell us to our next Mayoral Forum. So well done.
And I'd just like to look at the challenges and the key opportunities together, the double-sided large page foldout in our agendas. And I have to say that the comments around leveraging off existing provincial growth fund investments, and I really do feel the heavy hand of previous Mayor John Forbes on my shoulder saying, but aquaculture isn't mentioned in this at all. And with the Bay of Plenty looking to actually be up-and-coming leaders in this particular new, it's not a new industry to New Zealand, but it is a relatively new industry in the Bay of Plenty, and we have a regional aquaculture organisation that is seeking to reform and lead the circular economy in this area, and I just feel that really this needs to be in there in bold, please. And going back to the challenges, and I think this is where Jeff has actually highlighted the differences in each of the our TAs, that even what homelessness looks like is different in each area. And I feel that where we've talked about pressure to grow and build homes and infrastructure is mentioned, it probably actually needs a bit more information there around the significant differences. And even with, for instance, Opotiki has land, we have service land, that's not a problem, whereas it is in other districts. We are doing our best to get as much going as possible, but our homelessness is not listed anywhere, because our homelessness is whānau having 3 families in their homes, which is probably almost a unique Eastern Bay thing. I'm not sure on that. I apologise if I state that, but we have so many people who are just not on, you know, the statistics that the ministries lead by, and therein we, I think that there needs to be more teasing it out in this particular comment, because 1, it's one of our priorities we want to consider, but 2, we go from 2 far extremes in what we're trying to achieve in talking about this at government level, if that would be all right. That's from our perspective. Would anybody else like to comment on what needs to be in, or more emphasis or increased awareness around? I think, you know, our statistics on the first page, I could almost recite them by heart, and I'm sure that the central government have those facts, but what we're not pointing out is what those facts, they do create the challenges, but I think we're not quite delving into it deep enough. You know, for instance, in the Bay of Plenty, 25% Māori in our entire population, yes, but here it's 58%. Yes, and so the actual extremes are something that regionally we can't smooth out.
You almost need a regional and then a sub-regional underneath it, don't you? Because the east and the west, that's quite different.
Yes.
In many cases.
Yes.
And what lies in behind those stats is quite different. I mean, I don't think that Tauranga growth is adequately reflected here.
No.
Right. But, you know, you have land, well, it's in there, but it's, you know, it's a huge issue.
Yes. There are three different stories in respects, and I think we've sort of had this conversation that trying to blend it, actually you lose the richness of the information.
So you can still have a regional perspective.
Yes, absolutely.
Because
and priorities. Yes.
But with that sort of more granular information.
Yes, Misty.
Yeah, I do, it's in here where you've got your 3 initial priority areas for collective working together, but I like the idea, you want to stress the unique proposition of each TLA. To you, Steve, Joyce, You know, he said, if I'm going to be in government to invest in your region or your district, what's so unique about that? And where does it grow the national pie? So I think the unique proposition of each TLA then needs to, we'll pull out some threads across the region from that, build it from that first. The other one you touched on, agriculture and land. I think we need the diverse economic opportunities, because we have rather undersold, and we lost it at the Mayoral Forum, a regional approach to film. So we're rocketing ahead here in Rotorua because we invested in it locally as the home of Māori film production. And I think we need to have another look at what we could add value to in terms of some unique propositions for investment that will arise out of the region.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lee. Mayor Judy?
I just want to make one comment. I think that our challenges are very unique sub-regionally. And when I was on the district health board, you know, there was a constant discussion about what was working in the West, what was working in the East, and vice versa. Okay? But our opportunities are very complementary, I believe. I think there's a huge degree of that's a great place in which we work. So we just accept that our challenges are quite different stories. Yes, yes. But those challenges, you know, that we take the Port of Tauranga, and where the product comes from, that goes to the port, and we're very confident there's a very great link up there between the East and the West. One is we both need each other in that space. And I think there's a lot of other those opportunity stories where there's greater linkage that we should be.
And I think what I would also see the value of this collective document is actually for then the smaller sub-regions to be approaching our own members of parliament with the information showing the regional priorities that we're all looking at, but having the same information delved into a little bit in those 3 sub-regions so that we can then do our political work with our local MPs. And the information is there for all of us to put forward. We are working from the same document, however we have it slightly varied for what we're needing to do as well. Please, Chair Doug.
Thanks, Mayor Lynn. Look, I'm encouraged by this conversation, but I'd encourage you not to get down into the weeds in terms of concentrating just on your own specific issues. Think about the big picture and the environment in which you're operating. The environment in which you're operating at the moment is the Crown tells us on multiple occasions, we've got the mandate to make some change. And the pace of change that's facing all of us has probably never been seen in decades. And I think as a region, you need to sit down and look at all those different parts of the legislative that's been proposed to be changed, because it's on steroids. And there's going to be some decisions made, whether we're on the train or not. And I think as a region, you've got the opportunity to stand back and think, right, what's our input to all these respective bits of legislative change that are going to come? Because together you're much stronger than being all these separate entities.
Fiona?
So, is there an appetite to endorse a regional brief and incoming ministers and for the sub-regions to then do their own as well? So is that sort of from the voice that I'm hearing? Because you can hear that the key messages that are important regionally from the rest of the look at that sub-regionally so that you get those key messages together. Is that what you were talking about?
Fiona, could you just repeat that? I couldn't hear you very clearly.
So is there an appetite for the mayors to endorse a regional BIM and then work on separate sub-regional BIMs? There seems to be an appetite to have both in terms of having those sub-regional messages as well.
Eileen, first.
So I didn't hear that. I heard that there was concern that the sub-regional differences were being lost in the averages in documentation. Is what I heard. Yes, I heard agriculture was missing, and I've been saying a text from John Pauls this morning.
Tapping you on the shoulder too. So that's quite different. Yes. Anne first, and then coming to you, Steve.
Yeah, I think you lose something if you lose that regional togetherness. I think Doug's right. There's some big issues, but I also like Judy's way that she's shaping it, because I think you pick up Doug's with the opportunities are there at a regional level, but understanding that the challenges are different, whether you're Rotorua district or the Rotorua and Taupo district, Eastern Bay of Plenty and Western Bay of Plenty. So you can bring out your differences there to a certain extent. But the opportunities, you're right. I mean, that's why I'm here in this position, because of my link with the East. And so we are all interconnected, and we can't. The benefit to us is with that interconnectedness and presenting it that way, I think.
Steve.
I think we've got to be careful of terminology too. Anne knows a BIM is a briefing for an incoming minister. So, you know, what are we talking about? The next triennial, because it's gone. We've got our ministers. So we are, I understand once we agree the things that we can work together on regionally, I think that then raises the discussion about who are the key people that we get to these forum focused on the three things that we've said we'll do. I think at the end of this triennial, good luck to the next lot, we do get a briefing to an incoming minister. But no, you don't do a regional BIM now, but we work on our what we can work together on, which was what you see is put to us, which is great.
Thank you. Yes. As long as we don't leave it be a limiting thing, you know, do the bare minimum, as opposed to are there some opportunities that we need to look at across the wider region. I guess that's what I'm saying is let's not take a minimalistic approach to this. Let's actually say that we really care about all the listing in that opportunity tank and make sure that we've because we are all affected by each other's successes or potential successes. All right, so our action forward from this point with this. Suggestions?
Gee, I'd suggest that as if we have some issues in the east here right now, there's something we agree on in our joint committee. So the three of us can work on those and then come back to this, to the Mayoral Forum. I totally agree with Doug, and I said this the other day at reading, please let's not go off on a tangent and go tearing down the Wellington with that plague spine. Let's do it regionally, and it is so important. But if we do have issues, and I totally concur with you, I'm in the same boat. I wish I had a whole lot of motels that we could put homeless people in right now in Culver. We've got 2 motels, one's shut off to MSD, the other one is absolutely inundated, and the owner of that is, I don't know how he feels because he's obviously making a bit of money out of it, but it's not doing his business any good. We've got three families in one house and one living in the garage, that sort of thing, so that, you know, and that creates all sorts of social issues and so forth. I think that's something we need to talk about.
I just have concerns about time, as in this has been brought to us and we should now action what this is going to happen here.
As soon as we can
having
get
to wait for another set of meetings and
as soon as
coming
we
back.
can get that, because we're going to postpone it because of the lockdown, remember, last week.
Okay.
So if we can get that up and going again, we'll certainly bring that on to the agenda.
All right, Fiona first, please. And then yes.
So then, based on the discussion, can I suggest the recommendation to alter to receives the report and then endorses it's your Mayoral Forum key priorities. So this is actually a great snapshot of where you are and the 3 priorities going forward. Acknowledging that there has to be some editing, particularly in terms of the differences, and actually talking about those a little bit more and those sort of the differences locally.
Yes.
And of course, adding in agriculture, that was clearly needed to be there, so that you receive the report and you endorse this as a real forum priorities for the future. I think the other thing that CEOs can work on is this list that the attorney has provided, so that we can work together in terms of what needs to come to future Mural forums, and ensure that you've got that big picture that you'll further Mural forums.
And possibly putting an hour aside each meeting that we're covering a couple of those topics, not necessarily as reports, but as really get down and good discussions around possibly Misty.
Yes, and I think it's a good document. Congratulations to our CEs. We should endorse it, and then we should send it to government. We can always amend, the areas that you've added, but if we wait, we're not showing the urgency of the issues. So well done to the Chief Exec.
I'm sorry, but I just have to say, I mean, we've talked about climate change here and we've talked about housing. Social inequity is an important issue, but I think for us, funding for local government is actually a bigger priority in the long term. And I just wonder, we can put a lot of effort into social inequity, but actually, taking Doug's point, there are decisions being made that will affect you guys, not me, because I'll be gone in October, in our communities though, for the next 10, 15, maybe longer, given the way local government legislation does stay in place. And I think I just think that would be a better priority for us than social inequity. Or the RMA or something else. That's more immediate that we can influence. That was your. So I know the chief executives have all agreed on that, but
the changes to the RMA, I've just been reading my homework on that, and that's
it's huge.
There's some huge challenges and changes. Change in itself is a challenge, but there are some big changes that will affect us big time.
Madeline, that's a really good example of the big picture. Because each entity down around this table, I would suggest, is under-resourced in terms of responding to that bit of proposed legislation, which is going to be at 3 votes.
Yes.
You've got to make a decision whether you trust your colleagues to involve you, but collegially make one submission to that. And when's the first trials? April, May.
Moving at speed.
Sorry?
It's moving at speed.
It's moving at speed.
I was just wondering, when we look at the 3 initial priority areas on page 15 of our agenda, that the first 2 are inclusive of each other as one priority, and if we wish to put in a 3rd priority, that we look to the suggestion by Chair Anne.
And what is it? What is it that you want to add there? I think they're covered. They're going to bring out the funding of infrastructure.
It's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. My point was, we're all working on that anyway.
Yes.
It's all happening. But there's some other stuff coming down the road. We just got limited time and limited resources. So we're all doing this, and yes, we can keep talking about together and trying to make sure that well, you're doing it now. But there's some other big stuff coming to us.
Yes, we are the country in the world with the least amount of local government funding from central government, percentage-wise, than any other countries of the Western world.
No, could I just suggest here, and I'm on that governance and strategy group of LGNZ in Wellington, they are picking up that issue across the country. And they are picking that up and having the discussion right now with central government. And, you know, that is a high priority about funding tools and the need for investment, co-investment. I think us putting it in here is redundant to what is a national urgency discussion. That's why I accept this paper for us.
Anybody else, please?
I wouldn't want to leave it. The fact that Wellington's looking at it doesn't reassure me, because I want to make sure they land in the right place when they look at it.
Yes.
So I don't, I'm not going to have to take my responsibility as a mayor to say that, another group's meeting and talking about us and what they're going to do for us or to us, and I'd like to have that voice through there. Or to know.
Yes.
So the tension I see is that these issues here are the ones our community is screaming at us about. These are the ones that actually matter in the day-to-day lives of the people around us. The other matters, the RMA stuff, the 3 waters, the long list of things that then follows. From a small council's perspective, there is something you can invest in lot of resources with no impact while we're being screamed at for these things. So it's a constant tension between how much you turn to face your local community and how much you turn to face Wellington. I think that's probably the issue that probably faces the Eastern Bay in particular, trying to engage in those sorts of conversations. LGNZ has got some good working groups and they have got some good people on them, but I guess it's an open question as to whether that's sufficient for us.
Could I just speak to process here? At the last Mayoral Forum, and we wanted it to be called a leadership forum, we actually charged our CEOs to go away and bring back a paper. If we're now debating that we need other things, we're not really trusting the process that we directed. And I just think, I think the paper is very good and it should go as it is. We're using other forums in every forum that we're at about funding tools and constraints. So, you know, how long is a piece of string? And this was to go to the Minister of Local Government.
Yes, understand that, Lucy, but I think that the point that's been made is a very valid one for us, and I'm just saying there is no reason why that can't be put into a third initial priority, because I believe the priority 1 and 2 that are bullet pointed in here are the same thing. So we can actually put the second bullet point into the first one without taking away any of its importance, and then reflect on the need for better funding for local government.
Or the RMA. I mean, sorry, but you know, taking Steve's point, I've just come into this. I just read this as the priorities for your work together. Decision being made, and I'm just saying I think we have some bigger issues to go into the mix.
Yeah, Judy.
Sorry, I was just asking Steve, what's the productivity question? Their recent inquiry into the funding of local government, we were all very excited until the conclusion came out. We couldn't believe it. It's a waste of time, sorry. And so, of course, we worry about the voices in our own district who vote for us again. But they are less aware of some of these big conversations that do directly impact them, obviously, at the end of the day. And, you know, it's exactly what Anne says, it's that discussion around our funding, and which is about our relationship with central government and what that looks like. That, to me, is a highly unresolved issue from our point of view. The label of the Productivity Commission report was exactly what I wanted to hear, I'm sure they did. But that didn't give us any joy or any reassurance at all. So, you know, I think there's some big things that we need to otherwise our ability to respond to the loud voices in our community is going to be very limited.
And I think there does need to be quite a lot of pushback from the local mayors on some of the things that are getting directed at us by central government, because they aren't necessarily they're not for the betterment of our communities. Some of the decisions that are coming our way and being pushed onto us, in whatever frame or shape they are appearing. And I think, this is where we have to have our voices, and they will be different voices on different issues. So a way forward with this, please. Let's finish this so we can have lunch. My stomach's growling. I just get grumpy when that happens.
Well, if you do what you suggest and you combine 1 and 2, that gives us
an opportunity to put a third one in.
Yeah, to put a third one in, and whether you put in RMA or you put in funding for local government, or they're 2 big issues that we're going to have to deal with.
Yeah, no.
So through you, Chair, on page 17, yes, there's actually 6 priority areas, and the 6th one could be extended. So we've got 17, 18, is it? It's leveraging of existing provincial growth fund investments can be broadened, also including the.
Well, we didn't get any in time, so
yes,
it's a bit difficult to leverage off.
So at the moment you've got the social equity, housing, climate change, outcomes for Māori. There is one in here about future development strategies and RMA reform and regional spatial planning. But the last one talks about leveraging of existing provincial growth fund investments. That can be revised to firmly talk about local government funding tools as well. So that one can be strengthened in terms of that discussion.
Oh, I see. So
yes.
Linking that provincial
yes.
growth fund.
Yes.
Came through that.
Steve, can I maybe suggest a way through is, I think funding and finance is one thing for local government, and I think that's within the broader aspect of actually the future of local government. Certainly for us as councils, once 3 Waters reform happens, what is the future of local government? So I think we've got housing and social inequality, we've got climate change, and the future of local government, including funding and finance, and perhaps some sub-points of that might be further catalysing of provincial growth fund or other opportunities, infrastructure funding and finance. And we just couch it like that because the future of local government is actually still strongly absent from a lot of the narrative at the moment. And I think that's our biggest.
And it's included in the RMA.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So can I propose that that's how we couch it?
Happy with that?
That's much more acceptable. And it fits with we've got to fit with the strategy of LGNZ too. I don't accept that we just accept central government's position. I think we do certainly have to, advocate for our communities.
So thank you for that, and let's wrap this up, because what I would like to see, if this is all right with the forum, is that we have a little bit of a retweet, and it comes back out to us, and we all acknowledge the changes, just sort it through, and then it is sent forward. Are we all okay about that? Gives us a quick opportunity to look at how we go. But I think that's the essence of what we're wanting to incorporate is being captured, and we'll get the wordsmiths onto it. But it needs to go out. We need to get what we're wanting with the emphasis where it's needed and move it out. Okay, so we've slightly changed the recommendations. Do we need them to be reread to us, or is somebody happy to propose those?
Do you want me to?
Chair Anne is proposing. I'm happy to second that. And we're receiving the report. We're working towards just correcting the priorities, rewording a little bit. All good, everybody? Great. Now, I welcome our next group of people. We're actually going to break and feed you before you get to talk to us. Is that all right? Thank you very much, and welcome to our forum.
Can I just say we had right, we can get
Okay.
Short break.
Short break, yes.
Working lunch.
We can do working lunch, as in, 5 to 10 minutes, sitting down with our lunch and we continue on. Is that all good? And welcome, Brendan. From the Local Government Commission have already eaten, so we can sit here and continue to move along, and thank you for us having a working lunch. Brendan, welcome. And if you'd be kind enough to introduce your team to the rest here, if they haven't already done so, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for making the time available for us to come and have a bit of a yak. So we'll do the introductions first, then we'll get into the guts of the session. My good friend here, Janie Mayor, is a fellow commissioner. Janie is a former mayor of Timaru, 9 years as mayor and 9 years as councillor. Significant experience in local government. And I think you'll get an appreciation as we go through the discussion today around why it's important to have people like Jane on the commission who have that understanding. Normally there'd be a commissioner to my left, Sue Piper, but Sue's an apology today. She's in the South Island having a week holiday. My role is chair of the commission. So my background is 21 years on Horowhenua District Council, 12 as mayor, 9 as a councillor. The only observation I'll make in terms of my role in Horowhenua is that as I came into the district, I noticed a lot of your gardens are looking like really, really smart. I just want to acknowledge Mayor Campbell, who each time he came through Horowhenua, used to load up his boot with the plants out of our garden. Take them through to enhance this environment. So about the ratepayers, the first time it's been publicly acknowledged that Horowhenua
May I also remind you that we are being recorded?
I'm very happy to see it publicly. And in support today from the Commission, which is really important to appreciate, Penny Langley, our Chief Executive, and we've got Erica Mangan here, who is our assistant, and so they're taking the recordings of our notes today. The other acknowledgement that I must make is to you, Anne, remembering that you did appoint us to this role, and I do particularly remember the day when I got the phone call from you, which I consider pretty damn special. So I do want to publicly acknowledge your support of having us in this role. So with those backgrounds, we're here today to talk about a modest issue, which is code of conduct. And to set the scene, we are travelling the full length and breadth of the country, engaging with as many local authorities as we can. So the Commission is an independent body, and in its independent state, it chose to explore this issue. So we haven't been directed by the Minister, we haven't been told to do it by anybody. We've, of our own volition, chosen to explore an issue that clearly is front and centre of many local authorities. But I want to set the background for you first, so you get a little bit of an appreciation of where code of conduct eventuated and where it sits today. So in 2002, the Local Government Act was established, and in 2006, the Auditor General of the day did an assessment on codes of conduct. And they produced a report, and here are some of their observations, which some of you will find quite interesting, I'm sure. They wondered about whether consideration of the Act to be amended to require community boards to adopt a code of conduct. They wondered about considering whether the Act should be amended to specify the code of conduct as one of the matters that must be covered in a briefing to members at the inaugural meeting of induction. They observed that maybe councils should re-adopt their codes at the start of each training to ensure buy-in from new members. They observed that the use of independent external people rather than elected members for investigation of complaints might be worthy of consideration. And commented about the value of developing enforcement processes and remedies or penalties for breaching the Code of Conduct legislation. 2006, those suggestions were made. You can decide for yourself how much of that has come past and how much is relevant here today. You're also aware that there is a template for codes of conduct developed by LGNZ and made available to all local authorities. So on that basis of understanding that each local authority has access to the template, we chose to seek feedback from every local authority in New Zealand. And the easiest way to do that would have been to go online and just pick up the Code of Conduct that's on the website. We chose to not do that. Penny, the CEO, wrote to every CEO in New Zealand and asked for a copy of the currently adopted Code of Conduct. You'll be intrigued to know that 58 local authorities replied to the request. 15 got a second nudge. 5 got a further nudge, and 5 of them treated the request, the publicly available Code of Conduct, as an avoidance, which is actually illegal. So that painted a picture for us. And remembering, we are incredibly independent, and we felt that this form of information gathering was as honest, as honourable, and as pure as we could do it. So we presented that information to the Minister as an update. We've found that 55 councils have re-adopted their Code of Conduct in 2019, and 6 councils haven't touched it since 2015, so that's 6 years. Now, we've also learned, and you will know, that there are some local authorities across New Zealand who are prolific front-page news around codes of conduct. We learned that 53 local authorities have not had a Code of Conduct complaint that's recorded. We are putting the 2 words recorded in because we're hearing as we go around it. Well, you might have 53 that haven't, but actually there's some stuff we managed to sort out before it's got to the table. We respect that. There are 24 that received complaints in 2015, and of those 24, only 15 have received 1 complaint. You'll be aware of a couple of councils across New Zealand. One of them's had 8 Code of Conduct formal processes that are followed.
Don't hit my chair. It wasn't me.
So that's the picture today. So we've been wondered out loud about what it is that we might recommend to the Minister around codes of conduct. And hence the reason for us being here. We really need to get some feedback from you, thoughts, prompts, suggestions, and see whether we can pick up any themes that will assist us in the report that we make through to the Minister. Now, re-emphasise this was not a request of the Minister, it's us on our own doing this best. So we would wonder, should the Code of Conduct be included in legislation as one of the matters to be covered in the briefing to members at the inaugural meeting? It's not at the moment, it's what it's called. Is there value in the Code being re-adopted at the start of every triennium? And you'll understand it, none don't. Is there value in developing penalties for breaching the Code and that be included in legislation? Remembering this whole thing is, as we all know, pretty open. Is there a role for the Commission in the Code of Conduct system? Could the Commission be an independent platform for an initial assessment to determine where it may or may not go. The survey today has gone out, and a number of you will be aware of it. We've sent a survey across New Zealand to all elected members, and over 200, 204, 200, so we've had 206 responses. Now, in a percentage term, I think it's about 900, 950 elected representatives on councils, so it's about 20% return. But if we add in the community boards, then that is probably another 500 members of community boards. So if it's just based on local authorities, 20% return so far, it's actually, I think, roughly 200, over 200 people take an interest in responding. So all of their information will be collated, consolidated, and then presented in our final report. So that's the background. And as we've gone around the country, we've heard numerous horror stories that we're all pretty well aware of. And we've had a variety of suggestions about what we should do. Some are illegal.
They're the ones we like the most.
And so now it's now your turn to give us a sense. Jane will probably ask some questions and prompts in as well. Give us your thoughts about what you think needs to be considered as we prepare to take a paper to the Minister for consideration that has the potential to add constructive value, because we're not doing this just for the fun of it. We really would like to think that the paper that goes up has a sense of value that enhances the performance of local authorities across our territory. So that's where we're sitting.
And I guess it's the key thing, as all of you have found, I'm sure, social media is playing a very, very strong role in some of the misbehaviour that is going on. So our world is changing incredibly quickly. So I think it's time now that there's a line in the sand where we do actually update, do something credible to help you guys out, because you are in a very different place than I was when I was there. It was just starting then and a few issues, but nothing like you're having to deal with now. So yeah, new world, new problems, we really keen to hear what you think.
Could I, before all the mayors start making comments, could I ask that we just keep the comments short so that we can get more comments through for this group to take on board? So I know that's a rather rude way of saying, can we cut our talk down? But I think everybody has something to put forward here, and we can do 2 or 3 rounds that way, with short, sharp answers from each of us. Which question would you like us to go at first?
Whatever you think is the best way to improve the situation.
Steve, please.
Yeah. So conflict, of slight conflict here, because I chaired the Local Government and Environment Select Committee that brought through the Code of Conduct within the current legislation. But I would say that it certainly needs legislative strengthening. So I totally support that, that adoption, and also with penalties. The penalty provision that I think would be really helpful, and Jeff and I have had a talk about this, is that 2 complaints, you deal with them. The 3rd complaint, you should be able to invoke some sort of penalty. Recusing from taking part in committees of council for 6 months, depending on the severity, or up to a period of 6 months. So that's our suggestion. I think complaints against staff should be the highest priority, because they can never answer for themselves and they're hung out to dry. Political complaints against us, that's what the field that we're in. So they're not as important, but complaints from the public are very important as well. So I think there's 3 criteria there, political, public and staff members, and they need to be put into a hierarchy. The other aspect for us is very much the overlapping clash that we've got with the Harmful Digital Communications Act. That also needs to be amended in parallel, because the recuse of a bully who is upheld to be in breach of the code of conduct is to say, well, sit there and take a prosecution against me using the Harmful Digital Communications Act. Most of our complaints, the majority, have been about the use of social media. So we're just on a circular table of going round and round and round. We're up to about, for some individuals, up to 6 complaints about what they are writing on social media. So you've got to look at the Harmful Digital Communications Act at the same time. And I've talked to Lewis all about that. So that's our position in a nutshell.
Thank you, Mayor Steve. Mayor Malcolm, come to you next.
Yes, thank you. And I have to concur with some of the stuff that Steve said there. I personally don't have a problem with, because all my councillors are just so meek and mild and they do exactly what they tell. You know what dictatorships are like, Brendan. But I have to say that social media has been a fair bastard this last time around. It's been a bastard. And even to myself, not to me personally, but to my family. And I've got family, I've got grandchildren around, and some of the things that were said were just bloody horrendous. You know, they were just about beating material. Didn't get that far. But the other one is blaring right out in front of me, and I just got a text today. A gentleman stood for council, I'm not going to mention his name here because we're going to tape. He was on remand. He got 800, 900 votes. He could have been one of my councillors today. He's just going to go, he's going to go 3 years. The Majesty's going to look after him. That really concerns me that those sort of people can actually stand for council. You know, I know this is such a wonderful democracy we run here in New Zealand, but that's bullshit. My ratepayer would have had to pay for that in a by-election or something like that. But other than that, I have to say that I'm pretty lucky, but things are changing. I totally agree with you, Jane. It is just changing world, and I just couldn't believe the last elections were so brutal.
Thank you, Mayor Malcolm.
Thank you.
Mayor Judy.
2 points. I think that it does need reviewing, and I also think that it should be legislative requirement that at the beginning of a training is put before the council and explained to you. The only time I've ever got dusted it off and looked at it is a situation where, and it wasn't a council, it was community board people, in a public meeting, tantrumed like 2-year-olds.
Yeah.
I was so angry and appalled at how they treated other elected people in front of others. They were inciting, that's how bad I would call it. I went home and read it, and there was nothing I could find in the code of conduct that I could hold them to account with. So I actually know, I was supposed to how weak it was when there was absolutely deliberate, appalling behaviour directed at the mayor and the chiefs. So, you know, I was quite shocked how impotent it was.
I'll go next. So from my point of view, yes, totally endorse sanctions, stepped sanctions. Totally endorse that it's signed every 3 years. But we're still trying to ensure that even older councillors understand the code of conduct in some of the points, especially around media. Because that's where a lot of the mistakes and misuse occur. I actually believe that we should, when any person is standing for council before an election, that they should have some sort of conversation, talk, training, where the code of conduct is actually put before them, so that they understand what they are signing up to as an elected member. Because I think a lot of people stand totally not understanding the responsibility of their elected role or the ramifications for that responsibility. And it's almost as if, yes, you put yourself forward to stand, therefore we will, or someone gets them ready to stand, and they understand what's coming towards them once if they are elected in, what responsibilities they have. And I'd also like to endorse around stricter measures as to who can stand. Because we do have, especially in small areas, you have a lot of people who are not, how do I put this gently, who are, haven't quite grasped the concept of what an elected member as a person should be, as in able to take on everybody's views, to be able to have a overarching look at things, and that they actually are not too, and that's a hard thing to judge, but I think for the betterment of community and for democracy, we actually do need to have some sort of regard for the training of the people who are putting their hands up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you think all people are trainable?
No. No, they're not.
That's what I was thinking about. Some of the people, it doesn't matter what you do, they enjoy the attention and their personality type is not going to change.
So just while we're in that space, I know we're going around the room, but I don't want to lose it. One of the things that we would observe, what we've observed so far, is we'd ask the question about how well are mayors and chairs inducted or trained to understand the parameters of their. So just reflect on that, because we wouldn't mind getting some feedback in that space as well.
Okay.
Thanks, Lynn. So Brendan and Janie have had the opportunity to speak at RSG, so mine is repetitive, so I'll just repeat what I said. And no matter which way you look at this, essentially it's about the culture of the organisation and setting the leadership from day one. As Malcolm said, if there needs to be a benevolent dictator, then that's the culture you set in terms of people's behaviour. Having said that, until there is some form of liability or consequence, you can do what you want. Exactly. It's a wet bus ticket.
Yes.
And we've said this before, with the advent of all this new technology, this live streaming and all that is really just theatre. If you look at parliamentary systems, yes, the parliamentary system plays out in the chamber as theatre, but the real decisions are made in caucus and Canberra. They're not live streamed, there's no theatre playing out there, this is the real hard business. So I think in terms of leadership of the organisation, councillors, the best foil for bad behaviour is the peers in a forum outside that public forum really nailing and say we don't tolerate that sort of stuff. You make a decision whether you want to continue here or not.
And can I just add to that, because I'm not saying that we're 100% perfect in colour, of course, there's always a little bit of bloodletting, but it's not let out in the public. There's some discussions that go on behind the scene, and it used to happen by my predecessor, Mayor Hartley. It was generally in her office, and the stilettos were placed in the right place in the buttock. But I have to say that from what Lynn was just saying about, and I particularly for a mayoral position, if anyone can just come off the street, and I think you know where I'm coming from here, and take over a mayoral position because of popularity and nothing to do with local government, is so damning for the ratepayers of this country. That concerns me. You should have a little bit of input before you get into it. And I know that's sort of touching on nepotism, but you know what I'm saying?
I'd like to come to you, Chair Lan, because I think you're in a to actually have made some very useful observations, and I ask that you share them with us in the local commission.
Thank you, Mayor. So actually, I have two ways of looking at this, because I spent 2 years trying to get a parliamentary code of conduct, and struggled with that on cross-party using unions. So it was for the whole of Parliament, including media, unions, etc. I agree that you need to strengthen your code. I think your code it looks like it should have been developed in 2006, and I think it could do with more than just tweaking, and particularly around the use of social media, particularly around collective responsibility, and those two. The second issue, and look, I couldn't resolve it in Parliament, but you need consequences. Doug's absolutely right. You know, it does become theatre, and actually that plays into, all of that plays into your persona that you're trying to create out in your ward or wherever. And with the best will in the world, I don't think that you can do that without a legislative process. So if you look at parliamentarians, they adopt their standing orders, and then the Speaker controls it absolutely. I mean, there's no arguing with the Speaker, which is almost as good as legislation. And if the Speaker decides to name you, you lose pay. If you're thrown out so many times or you're away for so long, the standing orders are very clear, you're not allowed in the House, and you lose pay. And I think that's the only way you're going to be able to bring some consequences to bad behaviour. I've heard all sorts of stories from people over the last month about behaviour. I cannot believe that adults have behaved in the manner that they have. I think the staff have been heroic in trying to deal with some of that. But I've also had from the community, we need IQ tests. These are highly complex, multi-million-dollar businesses that you're asking a person off the street to come in and run. And I mean, no, you can't do an IQ test, but I think you're seeing from the community a level of concern about how those leaders are determined, even though you say they're not voted for them. But some sort of training, certainly for mayors and for chairs and for chairs of committees, just absolute. And then Parliament has now instituted some educational, so you can go off to the University of Waikato and you can do, they've developed a course, I think I'm going to promote to local government New Zealand, they have maybe through the commission you can promote it. But there's a sort of a part of a Masters in Public Policy which teaches you how to, first of all, how to write a report that's going to a minister, and then how to read it, the questions to ask. And some of that would be helpful, I think, for some of the councillors, and particularly the standing committee chairs.
Could I just come, it's very good when people have enough pay to actually have it taken off them as a fine for bad behaviour. But a lot of our councillors at rural level do not get a very high stipend. In fact, it is part-time. The mayor may be a different matter, but the councillors in smaller places, no. And including the community board members. So a financial sanction, I'm not sure if it's that necessarily works when there is so little to take away from them in the first place.
Do you think though that even taking away a little from a little does reinforce that it doesn't actually make a difference?
I think it's part of what else can be done as well.
Yeah, I suppose the great challenge in all of this, I mean, you could very simply have a situation where you're off for 6 months or get $10,000 not off your salary. Whatever. The question is, who decides? What's the process? So as we go around, we've heard some local authorities saying they've employed the best lawyer in town, they're spending $50,000, $100,000 going through this minefield So who makes the call? Is it the mayor and the CEO in an office? Is it the finance audit and risk committee? Is it an independent? And every town's got a different independent with a different perspective. So those are the things, because we really want to, if we're going to get anywhere, we've got to have some really constructive suggestions for consideration. We don't want to just produce a report that says, this is what we found, because we know what we're going to find.
No, that's right.
So help us, what you.
Mayor Steve?
Commission.
You, Commission. Commission. That's what you're there for, sure.
Mayor Steve?
Yeah, I think this is a really good discussion. I think an independent chair of risk and audit is absolutely critical. I wouldn't support the commission hearing or getting involved in complaints or breaches of the code unless you escalated that like to the Supreme Court, because you'd be in our town every week. All right, so watch it. But an independent chair, and we've actually put one with a legal brain, so that has the analysis, the capability that you need, and you could have a co-chair arrangement. But I also think they make a recommendation back to full council in confidential. So full council has to own and actually face and call out, you were in breach on this, this and this. We believe, and these are the recommendation options for a penalty. So you've got to involve the elected officials back in this process. And the other aspect I think would be a very interesting in your questionnaire, what has every council spent on legal advice to help them through code of conduct breaches? So it's getting into hundreds of thousands, and that's ratepayer money. So, I think that would be a tool that would be quite interesting to confirm to you. You must have a consequences, as Doug said, but it's got to be owned and led by the local politicians of that combined responsible group.
Chair Anne?
I wish I could have your confidence, Steve, that would work, because if you look at Tauranga, that would never work.
No.
I agree there needs to be a good process.
Yeah.
So currently, you say most councils have an independent investigative process. So the complaint's made and it goes to an independent group.
That's right.
Who does the investigation. That's the pureness of the process. Then
in saying that, Anne, because it's chief executive that chooses the independent.
No, you get your council to choose your independent.
Yes, that's quite hard. That's the difficulty, because people who are involved in it will then say this has been a choice.
But we do that when you right at the beginning of your term, when you are sworn in and you swear to uphold your code of conduct, and that first meeting you appoint your independent investigator as a council decision, along with all of that. That's the process you agree, and then the question is, from that investigation, who decides what the penalty is? And if you've got in legislation, again, that process and what the consequences might be, then in the end, it doesn't really matter who makes that decision, as long as they're a different body. I wish you could get your council to do it, but I just can't see that it would have worked. From what I've heard, you would have had a 6-5 or a 4-5 or something. Because you give the opportunity then to that person to go and get their little group of supporters, and you defeat the whole purpose. If you're not accepting as a group that you're working together, you're not going to accept that penalties.
I also believe that with under a code of conduct, in a smaller council as well, there comes a point where you say, if we follow through with this, the investigation, and what cost is it to the ratepayers? At which point I would be looking at, wow, can we afford that? And I know in some ways we can't afford not to, but realistically, can we afford that? So even the cost of going through the process for a small council is considerable.
How well trained do you think mayors and chairs are at the start of their terms in terms of stuff?
Well, I thought we were all well trained until I met you and I first time around. No, honestly, I did 2 terms as a deputy mayor, and I thought I knew everything until I got down there, and then I really. So I guess that's a little bit of.
The reason I bring it up, and I'll be honest, I am quite surprised at the level of understanding some people in the mayoral roles have around what they're actually able to do in meetings. I'm quite surprised. So, and I'll make that, I'll strongly stand up and say that. I mean, the training, I think, is honest. And then mayors elect their own. My own experience after 9 years of the council, going into the mayoral role is like starting again.
Yes.
It's absolutely like starting again. You have no idea the magnitude of the role. And so what I'm hearing, what we're hearing as we go around at the moment, is some pretty surprising commentary about what could actually be happening today to make a difference. It doesn't need legislation. It just needs people to actually understand what they're able to do. So I can see some eyes rolling around, or you've probably been around a while and you've seen it yourself. So,
Chair does.
But you're right, Brendan. At the end of the day, you go down this path of trying to hold people to account, and you've got a process. It's a semi-judicial process at which natural justice has to prevail. Correct. And if you don't make that available, then you're right in a big hole. So the better you can sort it out without going down that process, much better. Yeah. That's why I come back to the culture and the way you deal with these things out of public.
Mayor Judy, then Mayor Steve.
What I was just going to say was that one of the most helpful things for me is, because my first term was mayor, I had 9 years as deputy mayor. What I was Institute of Directors, and some of, because they really talk to you around ethics and around conduct and around their material is very good. Now, I also, in a previous training as a committee chair, did a chair's course on local government that does that for us, and it was very good. Again, that was very helpful. So I do think training is quite important, but I think certainly for mayor, it's more than maybe chair a meeting. There's a whole lot of other things that need to be added into the training.
Mayor Steve. Yes, I think the training is an interesting point. I do rely very heavily on the deputy mayor and the chief executive. So I don't, that's how we work, as a bit of a triumvirate. And I think the training through the training that we get as mayors is fine for those that bother to turn up. So it's not compulsory. And those that then get into the cart haven't been at that training. So I quite like it being an offer that they will be funded to do Institute of Director training. Because that's a sweetener, actually. And there's a short course that could be adapted for local government environment and the future of local government, which is probably better than LG&Z running the training that is voluntary at the moment. So, we've gone, and some of us, and spoken at the mayor's training about management of complaints and the code of conduct. But I look around, they're all eager mayors, keen to learn. And then I see those missing and the gaps missing inevitably. And it's quite good to say at those. We have problems too, But I do think the Institute of Director training was what put me in the best stead for any role that I've taken on, including other governance. We did have a bit of a hiccup at the beginning of our triennium this time round, because we weren't able to get our training into our council soon enough. And over time, when several months have gone by, and the actual code of conduct and conflict of interest training is down the track, and things have happened, that made it more difficult. And you know, that's just the nature of the beast with what's happened over this last time. But it's also something for thinking about for the next time around, as to actually saying these days will be in training right from the beginning if you're elected, and try and have those types of things in place. I've been quite amazed with the calibre of the training programs that we have had come, but trying to fit them in, and again, the cost of them, we really have to weigh those up in our little space.
I did neglect at the start of this, and I should have acknowledged. So LGNZ are doing a piece of work around code of conduct. We didn't know that, and they didn't know what we were doing. So just simultaneously, so we thought that was really, really interesting. Untitled, we've talked with them. They are really, really supportive of the piece of work that's being done. So I just want to make, I should have made that, and I didn't. So both of the bodies that represent the parties are really supportive of the piece of work that's being done. So
great.
But I think we've got a sense, we can go round and round in circles. I know that the team to make sure we don't miss the plane. But,
yes.
That's been really, really helpful. And every meeting we go to, we just get something more.
Yeah. Oh, Marty, you're going to say something.
Well, I mean, we have had some experience recently with both with code of conduct and councils trying to deal with problematic councillors, but we've also had a similar experience with the Crown trying to deal with problematic councillors.
Yes.
And the difference is that within the legislative framework of the Local Government Act, there are very, very clear guidelines, process, and sanctions within the Local Government Act for dealing with a problematic council. It's not the same for the Code of Conduct. And I wonder whether there is an opportunity to sort of look at that part 10 of the Local Government Act and try and grab the concept of what that does, and it's a cascading approach or an escalation approach, where you can't create a framework that might actually work for the Code of Conduct. And it does need to be sanctioned, and it needs to be legislatively enforced. Otherwise, it becomes a political tool for another platform. And essentially, that's what a number of the ones we've had have been used for.
So just that last,
that's a good observation.
Just to wash out on that one point, the other thing I found really, really interesting is this perception that these people, those of us around local authority tables, we are democratically elected, and it's our right to be there. And I do make the point that in the Parliament of our nation, you don't follow the rules, you're out the door.
Yeah.
So if that principle can be applied in the Parliament of our nation, you wonder what we might be able to do within the next layer of the same principles of democracy.
And the last point, I guess, is having been involved in both of those processes, one was a lot more effective than the other.
Thank you very much for allowing us to come on. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you.
Just keep the food shut next time you go through.
Just one comment, if you miss the play, Andy's a great cover. We'll look after you for the weekend.
Do you consider that you've gotten enough from the 4 points that you put forward for us to consider?
Absolutely. And we've got a couple more that we haven't had before, so that's really helpful.
Great. Thank you for giving up your time to come and be with us today. I think it's a quite helpful discussion for everybody.
Nice to see you.
And close the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. We are now closed for the day. No, we're not. We've got 2 meetings.